Okay, we're now live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Davinsky TV. I'm today's moderator, Nick. Today, we're going to be discussing the question of whether Jesus was truly the Messiah. In essence, are the supernatural depictions of Jesus in the Bible based on fact or mythological lore? Debating for the affirmative will be Shinji and RHO, and debating against the affirmative will be Xavier and Davinsky. We will commence with introductions first. Davinsky will start, followed by RHO, and then Xavier, and lastly Shinji. Allow up to 3 minutes for your introductions before going into approximately 45 to 60 minutes of open dialogue, and before the closing statements, taking questions from the audience. I'm going to be moderating this debate, so I ask the participants to cease speaking when I interject to guide the conversation. So without further ado, Davinsky, please begin your opening statement.
Okay, cool. And before I start, I'm just going to post all of my sources in the comment section after the debate is uploaded. And if while people are speaking, could you please, everyone, just put yourself on mute so it would help with the audio, because there was a bit of a background noise there. So I'll begin. From the City University of New York, titled The Philosophy of Religion, The Burden of Proof. One cannot claim that souls exist unless someone proves that they do not exist. To add to this, you cannot claim that Jesus was the Messiah unless someone proves he wasn't. The article continues, the burden of proof is always on the person making an assertion or proposition. Shifting the burden of proof is the fallacy of putting the burden of proof on the person who denies or questions the assertion being made. The source of the fallacy is the assumption that something is true unless proven otherwise. We can only prove a negative to the best of our understanding with what we have available. So for the purpose of this debate, Xavier and myself will be casting doubt on whether Jesus was the Messiah. The first obvious issue is that Jesus is not mentioned outside of the Bible until many years after his supposed death. And as many do, I reject the Bible as a valid historical source, evidenced by the fact that the very foundation of the Bible, the book of Exodus, which is the second book of the Bible, has no real supporting evidence. From Hazet, the founding fathers of Israeli archaeology explicitly set out with the Bible in one hand and the pick in the other, seeking findings from the biblical errors as part of the Zionist project. But as they progressed in the 70s and 80s, rather than substantiation, what began to pile up were contradictions. In Jericho, no wall was found from the era that Joshua was supposed to have lived. No evidence has been found that a large new group of people entered Canaan during their post-Exodus settlement period. Other unsubstantiated claims mentioned by Tel Aviv's University professor Herzog. There is no evidence that the children of Israel sojourned in Egypt, passed through a parted Red Sea, wandered the Sinai Desert for 40 years, or indeed any years, and no evidence that they conquered the land of Israel and divided it up into 12 tribes of Israel. Even today, with cutting-edge dating and technologies, archaeologists increasingly agree that Herzog that generally the Bible does not reflect historical truths. So given that the Bible is at best an ancient version of Hollywood's interpretation of based on a true story, why would anyone take it at face value? From the Washington Post, the earliest sources often only reference the clearly fictional Christ of faith. These early sources, compiled decades after the alleged events, all stem from Christian authors eager to promote Christianity, which gives us reason to question them. The authors of the gospel fail to name themselves, describe the qualifications, or show any criticisms with their foundational sources, which they also fail to identify. Filled with mythical and non-historical information and heavily edited over time, the Gospel certainly should not convince critics to trust even the more mundane claims made therein. There is no existing eyewitness or contemporary accounts of Jesus. All we have are later depictions of Jesus' life advanced by non-eyewitnesses, most of whom are obviously biased. Little can be gleaned from the few non-biblical or non-Christian sources, with only Roman scholar Josephus and historian Tacitus having any reasonable claim to the writing about Jesus' life within 100 years of his death, right? Have you guys heard of Chinese whispers? A lot can change in 100 years. From Biola University, a Christian-based Californian university, plausibility versus certainty, can there be proof in history? They conclude, something is in fact proven in history if there are several independent, reliable witnesses that concur in their witness, all of which doesn't apply to the life of Jesus or the Bible in general. So even if Jesus did exist, the most logical position would be that he was either a con man, a magician, or simply mentally ill with a cult following. That's the conclusion of my statements. Thank you. Nick? So, Ro, do you want to go next?
Of course. Thank you so much. So, my name is Ro. I'm an apologist, a writer, and debater. I was a monk for a long time and I studied theology, world religion, um, and demonology, and many other things. Our position, Shinji and my position, is not to prove that God exists, but to provide the belief in God and for the things of God is something that's probable. And if it's not for all, it can at least be for some, giving the evidence according to the faith itself, whether within the faith or without the faith. We hope that by the end of this debate, the question of the atheists and their view will be answered with genuine attention, academic reasoning, and civil dialogue. As it seems already, we have heard that the focus of this conversation is shifting from about Christ being the Messiah, um, which is easier to prove, but more or less going along the lines of C.S. Lewis um, debate tactics of saying that either Christ is a liar, a lunatic, or he's literally who he said he is. So by the end of this conversation, we hope to prove that Christ is literally who he says he is. And if there's any arguments about him being a liar or a lunatic, we would love to answer those. Thank you.
Xavier.
Can you guys hear me? Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay. So, one major factor needed to prove a Messiah or important historical figure is historical evidence. So, according to Bart Ehrman, so this is a man who attempted to prove the existence of Jesus in his book. He stated that it is a hard argument to make if you do truly believe that he existed. He even comments on this. He's stating that mythicists' arguments are fairly plausible. Ehrman says, quote unquote, according to them, Jesus was never mentioned in any Roman sources, and there is no archaeological evidence that Jesus ever existed. Even Christian sources are problematic. The Gospels come long after Jesus' death, written by people who never saw the man, so it's a hard argument to make. End quote. So imagine this: if a man's debated to have existed, where's the competency in stating he is a large historical figure or like a Messiah? It's harder to prove that if you didn't even know if he truly existed. So the burden proof states that positive claims must be backed by evidence. So did Jesus exist? This lays truly on two parties here, and we're just going to have to defend against that.
Okay, Shinji. You guys there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
So, the thing is, like, if you go down the line of searching for written evidence, you need to take into account that a lot of the witnesses at the time of Jesus were illiterate and analphabets, meaning that they couldn't read or write. And as we know, Jesus didn't really move in the richer parts of um, modern day Israel, which was Galilee and Judea. He moved on from like village to village, and his witnesses were mostly people like peasants, farmers, like casual lower caste people. And although he did stumble upon centurions like Roman generals, most of his interactions were with people who would have spread on the news via oral tradition. And this could be confirmed because if we look at the Gospels, that explains why the Gospels were written later on, because they are based on the oral traditions that were passed on by mouth. So basically, like, there's a peer-to-peer uh, evaluation agency going on because p- five, like, let's say to simple it down, 10 people would hear the gospel and they would spread it to the next generation. If one of them turns out to be like false or like changed or corrupted, the 9 other gospels would correct the wrong one. And this lasted until the scribes wrote it down on the manuscripts, and one of the earliest manuscripts would be the Dead Sea Scrolls, which traces back to 1,800 to 2,000 years ago. And yeah, so the lack of written evidence is not because they couldn't document it, it's mostly because most of the people at the time couldn't write. It was a very rare occasion where you could find someone who could document it in the first place.
So, shall we go into open discussion now?
Yeah,
Fine with
it's
that.
open discussion.
So, does anyone want to address what other people have said? We can go like that, maybe have some rebuttals to what each other has said.
I think, if I may lead, because I've heard that there is a burden of proof upon us in order to prove. There is also a burden of proof upon you to disprove. But the main thing I suppose I would go against or provide a rebuttal against is the idea that evidence is needed to prove everything. There's a reasonable amount of evidence that we already have. Eric Myers, who is professor emeritus from Jewish studies at Duke University, he says that when it comes to Jesus Christ, we can know that he exists mainly because of the crucifixion. That's pretty safe. However, things like the baptism in which he had are hard to support or locate. It doesn't mean that it's invalid or that it never happened because of the lack of written evidence, but it does mean that it's hard for us to locate those times. Like, for instance, many of us probably got up and brushed our teeth before this conversation, or at least I hope some of us did. But in that particular situation, we don't have that written. So tomorrow we have no proof that that thing actually happened. Does this mean we didn't brush our teeth? No. Does this mean somebody can question us and think that we didn't? Yes, because it's not written, but that doesn't mean we hadn't or that that situation never occurred just because it's not written. So I think that would be my main rebuttal, um, with that idea that it has to be written or it has to be notated in order for it to be absolute fact. Because most of history, most of anything we have is written either by the victors or someone who has a secondhand account of that thing. We don't really have firsthand accounts for everything that has happened in history.
I can address that. So, like from the Biola University, which is a Christian-based university, they even conclude in their own. Obviously, there's a biased kind of summary of what they've written. That something is facts proven in history if there are several independent, reliable witnesses that concur in their witness. And as proven, like there is no independent outside of biblical narrations that any of these stories are true. And when you do go looking for evidence to support these stories, what turns up is contradictions. Like there's no wall in Jericho that has been found after extensive archaeological digging. There's no proof that a tribe left into Canaan. Like there's so many holes in there, but I think there is like a strong burden of proof. You can't, I don't know. And back to what Sinji was saying about, you sure, like most people during that time were illiterate, but there's most people during most of history were illiterate and couldn't write. But there's still documentations of people like Hannibal, people that ancient people that existed, and we know they existed because they were documented from other historians, not just from within their own group. So, like, the only references of Bible existing are within their own group or decades after, which aren't really verifiable because they're not eyewitnesses at that point. 100 years later, we have a couple Romans saying that, there's documentation of Jesus, but that was 100 years later. If he was such a profound figure in the Middle East during this time, he would have been noted by, I don't know, Jewish scholars or like emperors of the region, but it just doesn't come to fruition like that. Does anyone want to say something?
I could. I'm sorry. So Byron McCain, who is an archaeologist and historian of religion and Judaism at Atlantic University of Florida, he actually says that according to most of history, he doesn't know any particular person. When you look at the broad and deep consensus among scholars, regardless of religious belief, he has not known or heard of any trained historian or archaeologist who doubts that Christ exists. So I guess if the main thing that we are making a goalpost is that if Christ existed, I want to make sure that that's the first thing we're tackling first rather than something else. So if you can make it specific for us, what are we aiming at firstly?
Well, the reason of bringing up whether Christ even existed, and as there's debate around that, is to show that like we're debating whether Christ was the Messiah when we're not even sure this person existed in the flesh. So it's just to draw some doubt on the claim that he is the Messiah by drawing doubt on whether he even existed as a person. That's the point of bringing it up. But if you want to move on to another topic, we can.
Oh no, I just wanted a specification of what we were doing. So I think I explained this to you when you told me the title, because in order to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, you would have to know the prerequisites and preconditions for one to be a Messiah. And so if my question is, if we did come to a conclusion, which many scholars have, is that Jesus existed, and the question of whether he's a lunatic, liar, or literally who he says he is, I guess is up to what we're having right now, is up to debate. But if the argument is whether Jesus existed, we already have the fact that Jesus existed. Now, if we want to believe that he's the Messiah or argue whether he's capable of being the Messiah, that means you would have to have some type of education or academic reasoning based upon what it means to be a Messiah according to Jewish studies.
But my argument is that you say that it's proven that he existed, it's a fact that he existed, when no independent scholars or historians verified his existence till 100 years after his death with two Romans that I mentioned. So I don't think it's established as a fact he existed. But for the purpose of this debate, let's just presume that he existed, and we'll go from there. Does Sinji or Xavier want to jump in?
Yes.
No, I'm good. I hear what you guys said, so I'm fine.
Do you have any points to make, Sinji?
Not as of now.
So I guess, where do you want to go from here? Is there any other concerns or rebuttals that people have made?
I mean, I guess I'll just state, as you said, so stating that someone's a Messiah requires lots of historical evidence. Like, would it truly be the best idea to state that this person existed when you don't even know for a fact if the person, as a regular person, even existed? Like, a Messiah in and of itself requires lots of historical evidence. Not to mention, could you even prove the person existed in the first place? It's a very hard argument. That's why we're asking those questions. But if you want to, I guess we can presume that he did exist. But then, yeah, you'd still have a large burden of proof.
Well, let's go down this line.
Yeah, I do agree.
Let's go down this line. What proof do you have that he is the Messiah? We'll grant you that he existed. He is a real person. What proof do you bring that he was the Messiah?
So the reason why I say it leans more towards our advantage, because anything that has to do with being a Messiah, means you have to believe the theology of the Christian faith, or at least, at the smallest the smallest allowance towards the Jewish faith in itself. So for the Messiah, there are some preconditions or prerequisites, and those things would mean that he would have to be a Hebrew, he would have to be born in Bethlehem, born of a virgin, prophet akin to Moses, a priest in order of Melchizedek. He has to be a son of David, and he would have to suffer before entering glory. Now, all of these are contextual if you're coming
Can I
from an
just
atheist standpoint. Yes, of course.
could I add one point? So all of these things you stated, like this could happen to an ordinary person. But when I say Messiah, I'm talking more about the supernatural claims, because everything you stated, like that could be anyone. Someone could be born there, they could be the son of that. It doesn't prove any of the supernatural claims, which would, I think, most people would picture as Jesus, doing these miracles and such.
Okay, so let's define what Messiah means to you. What does Messiah mean to you? Because to us,
So
we have
Messiah,
a clear layout of Messiah, and so it may be completely different to you.
So the Messiah would be someone who's sent from God, either the Son of God, or if you say God himself, it would be some of that. And you'd have to prove that this person had godly powers, like supernatural powers that are outside of what we would deem reality.
Okay.
So this is, I think,
Well,
the debate.
I guess more specifically, I would define Messiah as like a savior or a liberator, someone who has power over everybody and they can save everybody. Someone who's like miraculous. That's what I would define it as. So can you prove that? Is I guess what we're getting at mostly.
I can prove that according to what we believe in our theology about the Messiah, and I think that's the disconnect in this conversation, is that you don't believe in the theology of either faith or any Abrahamic faith, and you're asking us to prove to you what we look for in a Messiah. You don't look for a Messiah, so it would be irrelevant. And even if you did
It's not
look
what
for a
you look
Messiah,
for, it's if it exists, right? That's much different.
well,
What you look
yeah.
for is like subjective. The evidence, we're
Okay,
asking to lay out
so
evidence that
if
we
we
all can
could
look at.
equate the word Messiah to superhero, how would we define a superhero?
Well, superpower and Messiah are different. I mean,
Well, they are,
Messiah on
but
a
there's still a
yeah.
classification for a superhero, and normally it's something of supernatural gift
Well,
or ability, correct?
that's
But the
what I'm
difference
getting
is
at.
that
Is I think that's one of the prerequisites for being a Messiah, is having these supernatural abilities. And in order to prove that you're the Messiah, you'd first have to prove these prerequisites in order to grant that.
Okay, and so in order to understand that terminology that we're dealing with, we'd have to have some type of firsthand accounts or secondhand accounts. But however, you don't believe those accounts and view them as anecdotal. So if you're outside of anecdotal evidence, I can't give you an answer for that. Same way, I can't sit a MacBook in front of you and ask you to prove that Steve Jobs was alive without history, without anything, any anecdotal evidence, just by that laptop, prove that he existed. You can't.
well,
And I'm
me personally,
saying,
I'm just asking for any sort of evidence. Like I don't really mind. It depends on what you'd use though. Like you can't be circular and use evidence of like biblical text to prove that the Bible exists or someone in the Bible exists. So that's just what we're asking for. Like, is there outside evidence? You know,
okay, so is there outside evidence for what a theology believes within itself? That's what you're asking.
yeah, sure. Like, why would you believe it in the first place if there wasn't some sort of like objective reality that caused you to believe it in the first place? Like, did you just come up with this with yourself? That's why it's hard to believe. You know.
Well, no. So the thing about what Christians believe, or even what Jews believe, is that the fact of the word or the word of the prophets or the Torah, any of these things, they answer themselves. And in that means there's no lie or contradiction found within themselves. This is not just the same with the Christian or Jewish faith. This is literally almost every faith in the world. And I notice most atheists are very monotheistic, which is strange, because if you're against God, you should be against all gods. But there seems to be a focus on Yahweh or Jesus and the theology therein. So the main reason why you can't find anything that would attest to the scriptures in itself is because most of it is dealt with oral tradition. This is an example of things that people have seen and later was written down or collected. Most of the people of the Bible made sure they went and collected this information. Matthew himself being a very credible source, as he was a ancient version of the IRS. And if any of you do your taxes, you understand how thorough the IRS is. But also you have people like Luke, the physician. He came many years after Christ, but made it his job to go around and collect that information as well. What many biblical scholars have noted is that if you look at all of the gospels that tell the life of Jesus Christ, you have different narratives, which actually shows, according to psychology, that these are different people witnessing the same things, but because we are all different, there is a logical or a technical type of way of viewing or emotional way. And so it shows that there is something very different. But when we get to the crucifixion, everything is literally the same, which is where we understand that they are all witnessing the exact same horrible and terrible situation. And as I said before, the professor emeritus said that the crucifixion is very safe. So I completely understand you when you're saying that it's hard to prove that things like the baptism or the supernatural activities of Jesus Christ are real. There's nothing that I can pull out of my hat right now and show you, oh, well, this proves that this miracle that Jesus did with the fish and the loaves is true. I can't prove that to you. And if that's the premise of this argument, I would be digging myself into a hole. So to not do that, as I said, I can only make the argument that God and the belief in Jesus is very probable, just as almost every belief is probable.
If I would add a statement on the side, I would like to say, like, when you are asking whether Jesus is the Messiah or not, you're actually questioning his messiahship, which is his statement. So you need to follow his definition of the Messiah. And to add up to what Rose said earlier, so if we're gonna question whether he was the Messiah or not, we would be actually questioning his definition of what a Messiah is. You can't insert a different definition of a Messiah because that wouldn't match up with what he claims. So we would be actually debating two separate, disconnected topics. So to prove whether he's the Messiah or not, we need to look at the claims he makes and the conditions he sets, the Bible sets for someone to be the Messiah. And if that being lives up to those conditions, he would be, the Messiah according to the definition that the Messiah has in that book. Because if we just say whether Jesus is a savior outside of the Bible, that would be a whole broad, blurry take, like a blurry take to follow, because it would be relative, right? And one example I would give is, let's say, um, someone holds someone else at a gunpoint, right? Uh, let's say three people, right? Person A, B, C. Person A points a gun at person B, and person B points a gun at person C, and C points a gun at person A. So if C shoots person A, he would be a messiah of person B because he would save person B, right? But he would also relatively be the nemesis of person A. So the definition of a savior would become very vague.
But this savior, like, so you're using this like kind of hero definition of a savior, but as I said earlier, I think one of the prerequisites in order to grant someone the status of a Messiah, which is different to that of a hero, would be the supernatural abilities, because this is generally what's depicted in the Bible. The Bible is just not a story about some hero type architect. He's the supernatural being. He's the Son of God. He has these godly powers that other people don't possess, no matter how heroic they are.
Hey, Dennis, you mind if I hop
And
in
I
here?
think that's what the point. I'm sorry. I think that's the point we're trying to prove, is that by your definition, what you are creating, from your perspective, is a hero. From us, the word Messiah means literally what it means according to our text, according to the historic point of what it means. So Messiah, yes, means this person of supernatural ability, but even your understanding of what Messiah mean, or the Messiah, is not full. You only have this supernatural hero person that does this or does that. The Messiah is way more than that, and the only way you can understand the preconditions of what makes a Messiah is if you go by the biblical definition of what a Messiah is. And for that to happen, you would have to believe that the Bible has the adequate ability to define what that is, because it is by the Bible that Jesus is able to make this claim, if you're following me.
But that's exactly what
No.
Xavier said earlier, is circular. Like, you're referencing obviously a biased text in order to justify your position. There's no outside text or no outside historians from the time of Jesus to show that any of these miracles that are propositioned in the Bible eventuated into reality. It's like proving that Harry Potter was magical, reading Harry Potter and using Harry Potter as the source.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Okay,
hop in here. So earlier you stated that Christianity cannot lie about its own text by the virtue of them writing it, but that's not necessarily true. That's only true in the case of it if it's fictional, because it's all fabricated in the first place. Since you can't
and
fabricate or
that's your
lie about fictional text,
personal belief, correct?
well, that's what you said. You said that Christianity cannot lie about its own text by virtue of them writing it. But that's not true, because if we believe the texts are truthful or existed in reality, then you can lie about them because they're documentable evidence, right? Like they actually existed. Like, let's say, for instance, American scholars wrote about American history. That doesn't mean we can't lie about it, because that's of our own nature. Like, that's
Of
not true.
course.
That's what we call tautological.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's what you said. You said that Christians cannot lie about Christianity because that's their own thing. That's not the case. That's only true if they're
Well,
fabricated
actually,
everything.
I never stated that Christians cannot lie about their own theology. What I
You did say
said
that
is
earlier.
that the entire Christian faith is built upon, firstly, the Jewish faith. So there is no reason to, if you need to twist something, you don't need to use the exact same thing. So if we're going to twist what the Jews have already had, that means we would have to literally change something. There is no change of the word Messiah or what Messiah means. Just because the Jews themselves do not recognize Jesus as the Messiah because they disagree with him, that doesn't change the fact of how we use the word. Secondly, in the aspect or the thought that Christians somehow answer their own questions, or they answer, no. What I said was the Bible answers itself, not Christians. Christians don't answer the Bible. We don't define
But
what
you
a
understand
Messiah
that
is.
what I stated was that you cannot lie about something if you wrote it. That's what you just restated. So I didn't say anything incorrect.
I know. So again, you're going based upon the fact that Christians, one, wrote the Bible and they haven't. Christians did not write the Bible. We didn't come until later. So if you're talking about the New
So
Testament,
Christians,
then yes. So
okay.
if we're talking about Christians didn't come up until the New Testament. If we're just going to be contextual, Jews have literally written out what the Messiah is, what the Messiah qualifications are, all of these things. This is how the rest of the Jewish believers who became Christians saw Christ as the Messiah. So you're not battling Christianity. And I find atheists do that often. They attack Christianity, but Christianity is only a 2.0 of the Jewish or Judaism. So if we're going to attack Judaism, then you would have to have questions against what Jews believe the Messiah is. And that's not a question for us. That is a question for the Torah and the Old Testament. But if you are going to make that argument, as I said, with those at Duke University. They are willing and able to show the qualifications and preconditions that are necessary for a Messiah, because that Messiah is who they know by their prophets, by all that has been told to them, what a Messiah must look like. And so Christians recognize, though the first Christians were actually Jews, they recognize what qualifications Christ met. And by him meeting those qualifications, he is able to be the Messiah. To you, a Messiah is just a person that has supernatural ability. But that's not what a Messiah is. A Messiah, as I stated at the very beginning, has to meet certain qualifications. And those qualifications you easily wrote off as saying, oh, this can happen to anyone. Well, that's not necessarily true. If you know what the preconditions are, with that person having to suffer before entering glory, being a literal son of David or from the line of David, being a priest in the order of Melchizedek, being a prophet akin to Moses, born of a virgin, born in Bethlehem, and being a Hebrew. These are very difficult things to actually compile all together. This isn't a zeitgeist movement type idea where we're just slapping labels on people who had 2 disciples and calling them people that had 12 disciples. These things are prophecies that belong to the Old Testament. Now, if you want to debate prophecies, that's a lot harder for you to take a stance on. So the more and more you're going against Jesus being the Messiah, you're attacking what it means to be a Messiah, which means you're also attacking what the Jewish understanding of a Messiah is, which is based on their prophecies. So if you're saying that they cannot interpret their own prophecies of their own people, then that would be something for you to argue with a person of the Jewish faith or Judaism. So that's why my main point is saying that the genealogy, the characteristics, and the nature of the Messiah is laid out in the Old Testament prophecies. If you don't agree with those prophecies due to the fact that you don't understand what is needed, then that's something we would probably have to talk about first. Because in the beginning, we started off talking about how Jesus is either a liar, lunatic, or he's literal. And then we've moved the goalpost now with a bit of special pleading to get to the point where analogies and personal bias are pushing the burden of proof for us to now prove that Jesus is the Messiah without using the reference or anything that belongs to our faith. I cannot prove that Vishnu exists outside of Hinduism. I can't. I
All right,
can't
so
prove that any
I have a few
god.
things here.
Okay, of course.
So earlier you stated we believe that a Messiah is someone with supernatural abilities. That is what you said, because I wrote it down. But no one said that. We said that Davinsky said that a Messiah is someone of God or like God. And I said a Messiah is someone who is like a savior-like figure who is related to God-like abilities. So we didn't say supernatural abilities. That's one thing. And the second thing is, so let's say I did say Christians wrote, the Bible, therefore they can't lie about it. Well, I'll restate that. So biblical people wrote biblical things, therefore they can't lie about them. That's not true. That's what you call tautological. Circular logic. That just because you wrote something, the only way it would never be false is if it was fictional. If let's say people were to write about something that actually happened, well, then that thing could be false, or they could lie about it, or it could be laid upon some sort of faulty logic. So that's not the case. Just because you write something doesn't mean you cannot lie about that sort of thing. And then one more thing. So you stated that we have to go by the biblical definition of Messiah to truly understand what that means. That's actually not true. You don't need to go by any sort of definition to understand that definition. We all have a definition of Messiah that we all could look at right now if we wanted to, but we don't need to have a certain definition to understand what it certainly means.
I just want to add on to that
It's
one
not
point
really
too.
specified as something biblical.
I just want to add on to that point is if the Jews did make the requirements of what a Messiah is, and the Jews at the time of Christ, they saw that, hey, like he fulfilled these requirements, why would no Jewish historians recognize that? Like if they're the ones who set the prerequisites in order to be the Messiah, and apparently Jesus fulfilled these, why wasn't he accepted as the Messiah according to the Jews that dictated the first Bible in the first place?
For the same reason why they crucified him and rejected him. Like the thing is,
Why would they do that to their Messiah though?
Because they loved money, and the Jews at the time were making profit of money and basically all sorts of evil, wicked ways. So they would not document Jesus for the same reason. Like if you look at how they spoke about Jesus in the Bible itself. They basically described Jesus as a heretic, a lunatic, and such things. Well, Jesus obviously went and rebuked them many times for the evil deeds they were doing. They didn't like him because he was basically showing everyone else the evil that the Pharisees and Sadducees were doing. And that's also why they crucified him in the first place. So they wanted to mute the topic of Jesus as much as possible. And they didn't want to like spread the news because that would be like glorifying your enemy. And this even persists to this day, where certain synagogues explicitly avoid preaching the book of Isaiah because in the book of Isaiah, a lot of the prophecies fit the description of Jesus, right? So that whole book has become like a taboo to them, although it's still canon according to them. Yeah.
And
Eh,
I would like to add on to that. The main issue between Christ and the Jewish faith is that they viewed the Messiah as this person that was going to come and obliterate the Roman um, Empire. And the issue that we have, it's kind of the same that you have now, that you all have, is an idea of the Messiah doing something that is not true to who the Messiah actually is. As you stated earlier, you said that the person just has to be close to God. Well, then that would, beg the question of whether you believe in God or not. But if you're atheist, you don't believe in God at all. So even if a person could prove that they were somewhat close to God or in the exact essence of God, you would not be able to believe it. So the nature about Jesus Christ is that we have, according to the writings of the Jewish, should I say, the Jewish sect, that recognized that Jesus was the Messiah. And then there was the hard synagogue observing Jews who were in a state where they wanted to preserve what they had carnally, and wanted to focus more on reestablishing themselves as a as a kingdom, as a people, that they missed out on their Messiah. So this is why there's a divide. So the Christians, as I keep going back to, the first Christians were Jews who recognized that Jesus Christ fulfilled everything. And then there was those who hated Jesus for what he was basically reconstructing. He told them often that the way you are doing things is not how God wanted them. You're using the law of Moses to allow you to do whatever you want to do. And so this kind of put the Jewish faith in a perspective to where they had to clean up, and it, fostered a lot of the hate that came towards Jesus. So yes, it would seem like, oh, why didn't the Jews listen to the person that came to them that had all of these preconditions and everything that was necessary for him to be the Messiah? It was just that they didn't want to listen. Not all of them were against Jesus Christ, but some of them were, those who had stature or some type of leadership in the community, and they did that because of selfish means. So then, once again, like I'm saying, we're taking this downward stair step into the issue between Jews or Judaism and the rise of Christianity, not so much as understanding what a Messiah is, because I feel like you all still feel that a Messiah, though you're saying, oh, this person being close to God or being in the likeliness of God, that isn't specific enough, seeing that you don't believe in God. So when you say Messiah, you actually don't know what Messiah means.
no,
Yes, if we
Messi-
tell, of course, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Messiah has many definitions, and I think in order for you to grant that Jesus fit the definition of a Messiah, even from your own logic, you would first have to grant that the Old Testament was true. And I'd ask you, what is your evidence to support that?
So
I
firstly,
have one more thing too.
going on
Do
the
you mind
fact
if I hop in
of,
real quick?
oh, no, go ahead.
Okay, so earlier you stated that basically atheists would never be able to believe in a Messiah because we lack a belief in God. But this is not necessarily true, because if you were to somehow establish his Messiah-like nature, we would surely believe it.
Mhm.
Like, this is where the burden of proof falls, is that you believe we can never believe in a Messiah due to our lack of belief in God. But the truth is, in this debate, the lack of the Messiah proves the lack of a God. That's where the logic tree follows, right?
Well,
I
not
agree.
really, because so let's go back to the fact that you said the Messiah has many definitions. So Messiah only has one specific definition, and that's the savior and liberator of a group of people, or basically a sect. If there's a specific type of person, so saying savior, yes, but it's mainly anointed one who is anointed and is a savior or liberator of a specific type of people. Now, what we believe, our theology, is that Jesus saved all humanity. And the issue with what you're saying, when you're saying that you can believe in a Messiah type figure, and you will take that figure and then believe in God, is the same as saying if you can taste a baked cake after it's baked before you actually bake it, when it's just the main ingredients, then you'll believe that I cooked it. That's literally impossible. You can't taste the cake until you bake it. You won't believe in the Messiah until you believe in God, because you have to believe that God is the Messiah.
No, that's
And
not
that's
true. You
that's
could
the
you could
what
I
prove the
mean,
Messiah
okay,
exists.
can
so
I hop in
yes,
for
of
a
course.
short while? Because when we're gonna argue about a certain term, we need to make sure we stay within the same reference, right? The
Hmm.
reference of the word Messiah, we're talking about a biblical reference point, and not outside.
Of
Just
course.
like there are words that have multiple meanings. Like, for example, the word mine could either be a possessive term, like a possessive noun, like it's mine, or a landmine. Just like how the word interest could point at whether you find something interesting, or it could mean something economical. So you need to stay within the context of the word where
Exactly.
it's mentioned.
Oh,
Like, if
well, let
we talk about the biblical Messiah, you can't conflate that term with some outside definition, because the Bible didn't even imply that other definition. It implied the definition that it gave itself.
if
So,
you're
of
the son
course,
of God and you are God yourself, then surely you would have some supernatural abilities that other people wouldn't possess. Like, so for
no,
instance,
but
like you can take these like criteria from the Old Testament and say, like, okay, he was
Hmm.
born from this person, he was born in this region. But are you
Hmm.
saying that the other depictions in the New Testament, such as, I don't know, turning bread to fish, walking on water, that these are fabrications, or are these also like these are analogous with Jesus? This is what he did, right? This
but
is part of being a Messiah, is healing,
Yes.
doing these miracles.
Yeah,
This is an intrinsic part of being a Messiah. So you can't
and
just
then yeah,
ignore that aspect.
Well, not really. See, that's the thing. Again, you're conflating the idea of a supernatural person. The prophets were supernatural. They multiplied oil, food, bread. They caused rain. They ceased rain. So having this supernatural ability has nothing to do with being a Messiah. This has to do with being God. So your question here now becomes: is Jesus God? Which is a whole different topic from Jesus being the Messiah. So when we're talking about Jesus being the Messiah, we have to, like as Shinji said, we have to go back to the biblical meaning of what a Messiah is. You think a Messiah is this, that, and the third, but we're telling you that a Messiah is an anointed person that is here, or has come here for the very fact of saving people. And according to our theology, he has saved mankind. Now, you can't prove that he didn't save mankind.
all right.
That's not something that you can. But
You mind if I
what
hop in
you
here?
can do is provide reasonable doubt for why you think he has not. But then that would be an entire different Messiah. So when you're saying the true Messiah, you're saying it as if you have an example of another Messiah that you can put next to Jesus Christ. And if you can, I would like you to, if you could supply that name of that person that you feel like is more of a Messiah than Jesus Christ, going based
Here's what
upon
I'm gonna say.
the Jewish
So
understanding of Messiah.
the word Messiah, it comes from Hebrew, which means anointed, as you said, meaning
Yes,
Jesus is the one anointed from God to save or liberate humanity, right? So
of
what we're
course.
trying to get at is, why would this be the case from a documentable standpoint? And you guys have yet to actually prove or show us anything that would make this true.
That would make what true? I'm saying that's what I'm asking for,
That Jesus
clarity
is the
on
true
what.
Messiah.
Okay, so one, in order to understand if Jesus was the true Messiah, you have to understand what a Messiah is. So what
I
you've
just gave
read,
you the
and you
definition,
seem
right?
like,
We all understand
yeah.
that.
Okay,
Everyone
so
here
you have the
understands what the
definition.
Messiah
Now,
means.
reading a definition doesn't actually mean that you can
I
grasp
didn't read the
the
definition.
concept.
I just said this off of the top of my head. I know what Messiah means, right?
Okay,
Anointed
so
Hebrew,
if you
meaning
know
the
what
one anointed
Messiah
to save
means,
humanity.
if you know that the Messiah is here to save humanity,
Mhm.
do you have an issue with correlating that Jesus is capable of being the Messiah? Correct?
Not that he's capable, because any person could be capable. We're saying,
Well,
why
no,
would you believe that?
then that means you don't understand what Messiah means. No
I
one
do
is
understand what
able
Messiah
to
means.
be no. You have an understanding of
Yes.
what the word Messiah means, but it's not the actual application. If
No,
you
because
think
here,
that
this is what,
anyone, if you hold on one
here's
second.
your premise. So you're stating, since I believe that Messiah could be anybody, and you believe
Yes.
that Jesus was the true Messiah, therefore I'm wrong. But what you're not
No, no, no,
understanding is
no,
that I
no, no,
don't
no,
believe that
no, not
Jesus
that at
truly
all. No,
existed or he was a
actually,
Messiah. Therefore, I
the
wouldn't understand that.
truth is that whether Jesus is or isn't the Messiah in my belief doesn't matter.
But you
It's
can't just,
about
so in a
what is it.
debate,
Hold on, one second,
you can't
one
just
second.
believe in something in this
Hold
debate. You have
on,
to
one
actually
second.
lay out the evidence first.
One second. So
I,
here's the premise. You just said the Messiah can be anyone, and according to the scripture, the Messiah cannot be anyone. There are
But I'm
prerequisites
not basing
and
can
anything
there
I
are
off
just
scripture because
preconditions.
that's yet to be
But once
proven. You
again, you
can't just
need
base
to
your
I
look
just
belief
want
at
to
on
the
add
that.
one thing in.
reference.
I just want
Like
to add
when the
one thing.
Bible
So
says
is
Messiah, like
yeah,
I know,
but
sorry,
how
Davinsky, but hold on. Can I
we all know
add
what Messiah
something?
means. I don't know why you guys keep trying to
For
like go
example,
over
in the
this.
Bible, even within the Bible itself, you need to respect, as a Christian, like even among Christians, the definitions of certain words, right? Because, for example, both Lucifer and Jesus were described as morning stars, right? But the context and the definition was different for each one. Just like how Lucifer and Christ were described as lions, the context and the, how do you say it, definition that the Bible gave was different for both of them. So when you are going to question the messiahship of Jesus, you need to understand why he was called Messiah in the first place. If you want to know why he was called that, you would need to look at the Old Testament and all the conditions of what they use to define a Messiah. Like you
so
can't use an outside definition
How about
because
this? Why
if
don't
I
you
talk
tell
about,
us?
hold on,
Why
if
don't you
I,
tell us what you believe it is, and then we
no,
can
no,
talk about that
hold on,
instead of
hold on,
you keep trying to
hold
like
on, let me
criticize
finish.
what we believe it is because we
Moderation,
already all
please.
understand what this is.
Nick, moderation.
I
Okay,
want to go after
Yeah,
Sinji.
so
you guys are
for
talking
example,
over each other too much. Just
yeah,
try and be respectful, please.
for
Well, they
example,
keep
if
going over
I
the same
talk
points.
about like economy and I talk about the word interest, I look within the economical reference frame for what that interest means. And if someone else comes to me and uses a different definition outside of economy, of course, I can't talk about whether it's interesting or not because I'm talking about something entirely else. I'm using that reference frame to define what interest is. Just like the Bible defines what the Messiah is, and we believe in that definition. So when we call the Messiah, our Messiah the Messiah, you can literally exchange the term Messiah for the definition, right? For every time that the Bible refers to a Messiah, the term Messiah would be interchangeable with the definition itself. You can literally scrap the word Messiah and replace it with the conditions, and it
Okay,
would mean the exact same.
I just want to add on. Okay, so give me a minute here. So let's just take that Jesus was the Messiah, right? But my point is that if he's a savior for humanity, and in the Old Testament he would be born from God, right? He would have these supernatural abilities. The point of Jesus doing all of these miracles was to prove to the non-believers that, hey, I am the Messiah, and here is the proof. So it's not just enough to be like, hey, I was born in this village, I was born from these parents. This wasn't enough for Jesus to even convince people during that time that he was the Messiah. They needed extra evidence to support this claim. And so what I'm saying is a miracle is a core component of being a Messiah. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done all that. He would have just shown them their birth certificate and been like, yeah, these are my parents. This is where I'm born. I'm a Messiah, bitch. No, he had to do all this extra shit to prove that he was the savior of humanity, which is the definition of Messiah.
Well, so again, let's go back to the definition of the Messiah. As I said, I only have a couple of minutes left for this call, and I'm glad to be part of it. One of the things about what you're saying about the Messiah is that you cannot find the term Messiah outside of Abrahamic faith. You cannot find it in the way that we use it now. It's probably common because of pop culture now, but a Messiah is a specific person, a delegated person who has a specific task. Anyone cannot be the Messiah, which you have stated. That is false. 2, you cannot conflate the idea that miracles were needed to prove that he was the Messiah. Miracles were provided for people to believe that he was with God, just as the prophets had the same amount of miracles, if not even more, to show that they were with God as signs that they were God or with God or of God. So this was more or less to prove his godhood or his connection to God and authority to be able to even approach and say that he is the Messiah before anything. So the miracles were not needed for him to prove that he was the Messiah. There are no actual scriptures that say the Messiah necessarily has to do these particular types of miracles, because if that was the case, the Jewish synagogue and Sanhedrin would have adhered to him. The thing about the Messiah is that he is somewhat ambiguous. Nobody knew where he was going to come from except for what's put in scripture. There was no details of what he was going to look like or any of these things. So
were there details about his birth? So he was the son of God,
there's
right?
details. Yes, there's details about his birth.
You would also have to prove that there was a seed implanted from God into this woman. Like that would be proof of the Messiah. Like you can't prove that. So therefore it falls on its head.
Okay, prove to me that your father is your father without a paternity test.
That's what I'm saying. Is like you'd need a paternity test. Otherwise, you're just like taking
Okay,
it for face value.
so
And there's so many other historical
of course,
inconsistencies
So
in the Bible where you can't take it for face
technology.
value.
Tell me the technology we have to prove that paternal parents could be gods. Like,
Well,
do
I
we
mean,
have the
you
ability
don't
to measure
necessarily
that?
need technology for that. Like, you could also use phenotypes, but I mean, unlikely somehow
You could.
implanted by some sort of spirit, so we can't
I
use
mean,
that.
immaculate births are very common. Immaculate births are very common. So, I mean, if this is an issue with the lack of technology, then I guess we would just have to wait and see. Much of what we have or don't have right now is based upon the advancement of technology. So maybe about 50 years from now, we could, if we're still alive, come back
Did
and
you
have
say
this
immaculate
conversation.
births are common?
Yes, immaculate births are common.
What do you mean by that?
What do you think that is? Like, what do you think that means?
So, according to our theology, immaculate births are when people have children without ever having sex. They're virgins.
So give me an example. Give me like since it's so common, can you give examples of that happening, like today or recently?
You can actually look it up yourself. Look up immaculate births or people that have children without ever sleeping with anyone. It's a very common thing.
So
That's
someone
not a common thing. That
someone
doesn't
like
happen.
ejaculates on some sheets in a
It's
hotel,
like
and then like
impossible.
shortly after, someone lays there and spreads out, and then like,
Yeah,
if
it's funny that
you
you said
can't
that.
understand, if you can't understand this,
It's funny that
something as
you
simple as the
that you truly
definition of
just
the
said that.
Messiah, I don't think you don't understand. I wouldn't think that you could understand anything else. So
but
again,
what I'm saying
I
is
find it
like
funny
seems
that
like
you
there's
stated
some
that
people here
immaculate
that need
births
to
are
do some
common when that's
homework.
impossible.
And like I said, because your
your
main idea is rooted in technology, maybe we
Of
don't
course, why
have
would it
enough
not be rooted in
evidence right now.
technology? That's what brings
Okay,
humanity
so
forward.
thank you for letting us know what your true focus is. So based
Well,
upon
you're saying
technology,
this as you're using a phone,
I just want to
as you're
add.
sitting in a house,
I want to
as
add
you're
one.
doing
I want to
electricity.
add one
Come on.
thing.
of course, one second. I'm just saying,
Hang
right now,
on.
we
No, because
don't
you
have
say
the
that there's no.
technology to prove the things that you are looking for. So until we have that technology, what's the sense of arguing over the only thing you're going to believe, which is technological
The
or
sense in
scientific?
arguing is that you guys use it to
hang on.
base your entire world philosophy. This is clearly something that requires
And
argumentation.
also, you're saying that there's no supernatural like prerequisite for being God, but obviously being born from what do you call it? And
immaculate conception. Or
Immaculate
that's
conception?
literally supernatural, dude. That's
Yeah,
literally
no.
It's
supernatural.
not
That's also not
supernatural, as
common.
I'm telling you. Look medically and find how many people
That
have
doesn't
this
happen
type of
That's
birth.
not how biology works.
Yeah, no, that
Oh
doesn't
my
happen.
God.
Okay, so you're talking like biology is a hard science. It isn't. Go look it
Absolutely.
up. Somebody needs to do their homework.
Dude,
You
people
need
do
you
not-
need an egg and you need a sperm, and then like
Okay.
when two
immaculate
parents love
conception
each
doesn't
other.
happen.
When two parents love each
Okay,
other.
guys.
Well,
Hold on. I'm gonna say something to you real quick before we go.
yes.
So earlier you stated that prophets were supernatural. So here's
Yes.
the thing: maybe in like a fictional biblical manner, but you can't actually use that as a point until you've proven that actually occurred. So
Okay, again,
Christianity
you are
is not
making
able
the
to be
inference
proven
that we
unless you
cannot
systematically prove
answer our
everything
own
from the
question.
ground up. So since you didn't prove that, then you can't actually use that as evidence.
Okay,
And one more
so
thing. So earlier you stated that
you're
hold
trying
on.
to
So
take.
earlier you
Okay, go
stated
ahead.
that Messiah outside of you cannot find the definition of Messiah outside of Abrahamic faith. I agree. This is true. The word is intrinsically connected to religion, right? This disproves actually what Shinji said earlier, though, when he tried to say that well, you have to know whether like the words have synonyms like interest in economy and interest in relating to like human excitement. Well, since Messiah has no synonyms in that manner, why even bring that up? That was a ridiculous point.
Because
So,
you are
glad
using
that you said
the
that.
fact of Messiah and trying to equate it to the same as Savior. So he is
No one
completely
said that.
correct. Yeah, yes, you
I
did. You
literally
said
said
this
that
entire
Messiah
argument.
means anointed. So Messiah is anointed
Yes,
in
but
Hebrew,
you
which
also
means you're
said that
anointed from
anyone
God
could
to
be
save
the
humanity.
Messiah. If you believe that
Because
anyone could be the
anybody
Messiah, then you
could.
don't
You've yet to
understand.
prove it.
No, they can't. If you say that the Messiah is based upon our theology and our religion, and we give you the definition of what a Messiah is, and we know specifically the prerequisites and preconditions, you can't tell us.
Here's
Which
why
is
I'm
Hold
being
on,
saying
hold
that.
born
on, hold
from
on.
God.
Here's why
Which
I'm
is being
saying that.
born from
You
God.
can't
I'm
tell
saying
us.
this. So
You can't
Messiah
tell us
could be
what it
anybody
means.
because you've
You
yet to
say it
prove
can be
who that
anybody,
is.
and we tell you it
Therefore,
can only be one person.
but
That's the
you've yet to
difference.
even prove that one person existed. So of course it could be anybody if it truly existed at all.
No, it can't be
You're
anyone.
using
There's
tautological
So
logic to say, well, since he existed.
there's no biblical reference, non-biblical references of Jesus existing until like a century after his death by two
That's my
Roman.
point. Yeah.
Okay, so if that's the question, then why do you
Of course
care
that's
if
the
Jesus
question.
was the true Messiah?
Because
Because
this is
it
what happens in
relates
the
to a
world. Like
religion. Yeah.
and it relates to the real world. Is like this is a
Why do you?
reason why.
But
So
this
hang
is
on. You
this
ask a
is
question,
okay.
you cut
Go ahead.
people off
Go
too
ahead.
Guys,
much, dude.
yeah.
Let
Okay,
me
let each
finish.
other finish, please.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the reason that this is important today is because like arguably from my perspective, secular nations are the best. When you impose your own worldview, which is based on this premise that what you're believing is correct and what you believe in is because this book said it, as Xavier said earlier, it's circular reasoning, then you put your moral worldview onto others but don't believe what you believe. And fair enough if you can prove your worldview to be correct, but the fact is you can't. So like this is the problem. It has real world consequences. This is why like homosexuals were like stoned to death and like witchcraft was, people were thrown off like cliffs. Like this has real world consequences. It's not just some
Not to
pipe dream.
mention,
It's like
not to
go
mention, you
against
actually
that,
don't get anything
what
from
mainly
religion
goes
that you can't
against
get from
that
other
fact is
things.
the fact
Like,
that you're doing this thing like most atheists do, is you aim everything at Christianity.
I'm not atheist, by the way.
Okay.
well, this is a
I'm
Christian
sorry.
religion. The
Yeah,
title
so
was
it-
Jesus the true Messiah? Clearly, we're
So,
going to be talking
like
about
I
a specific
said,
topic.
yeah. So
We've all debated.
you
We've
won't let
debated
us
Muslims. We've
define.
debated Jews.
You won't let us
Like,
define what the Messiah is. You won't let us tell
I won't
you
let you.
what it
What are you
actually
talking
means.
about?
But secondly, in this conversation, you act like it's just the Christian worldview. It's everyone's worldview. You're on here right now trying to build a worldview for what you believe is correct. We are not the only people that have specific rules against homosexuality. There are tons of religions that do, but for some reason, atheists and agnostics
point
only
is,
focus on Christians.
that's a
I don't
whataboutism.
see
We're
what that is.
debating
But
Jesus right
as
now.
I said, I'm going to go back to the initial. Yes. Was Jesus the true Messiah? According to the burden of proof, we can provide what is necessary for the Messiah to be here based upon what we know. You don't believe that, but even if you did, or you're looking for a Messiah, you would never be able to conclude if Jesus was or wasn't, because one,
you can't
I've already
conclude that he
disproved
was
that.
though
I've already
either,
disproved
because
that.
you would also have to prove that he was born from God and through an immaculate conception, which is
Which you said was
scientifically
common
impossible.
earlier, which is like hilarious because that doesn't happen.
Okay, so we don't have to prove that he is born of God. First of all, the first
Isn't
things
that
we
one
have.
of the requisites
Yeah,
to be
yes, it
a
is.
Messiah?
It is, but
Anointed
there
by
are
God.
other things.
That's what it means.
Exactly. So tons of things are in line long before we get to that. So if Jesus
But
isn't
one of
born,
the
if
main
Jesus,
factors is that he has to be in
If
some
Jesus
sort of
wasn't
connection to
born in
God.
Bethlehem, If Jesus wasn't born in Bethlehem, it doesn't matter if he claims to be the Son of God or not the Son of God. I'm approaching
Bro, the
this from a
definition
very
literally just
hold
means
on.
anointed
I'm
by God. It
approaching
doesn't
this
matter
from
where
a
he's born.
marginal type understanding. If we're going by this checklist from the top to the bottom, if Jesus isn't born in Bethlehem, it doesn't matter whether he claims to be born of God or not born of God. He's out. If he's not able to meet any other prerequisite, he's out. When we get to the Son of God, this is something that we have to go through genealogy, which we have in our theology by Matthew, by the other disciples who were there in his presence, who knew him, who saw him. Now, if you don't want to take their accounts, then that's up to you. And that's
It's not
where the
about
debate
if we
continues.
want to. It's about
It
why should we?
is about
What is
whether
the
you want
evidence
to
that
or not. So if
no?
if I
And
Because
the
gave
you shouldn't
if I
just believe
gave
in
you
everything
if
you
I
want to
gave you
believe in.
all
That's
the
not how things
evidence that
work.
you wanted, you would still find something else. Because at the
No,
end of
no,
the
it's
day,
not
it
about
is
a
not.
want.
Hold on. It
It's
is
not about
about
that.
a want. It's about what
It's
you
not.
want to
Because
believe.
you can't just
Because
believe
if
everything
you
you
want
want
to believe, you've been fighting this entire time about your personal belief of what a Messiah is.
No, of
Not what
course
the
not.
Messiah actually is, but what you want to
Of
believe
course
it
not.
is.
I've given you the literal definition of what you guys believe it means. There's no
No.
personal definition.
So the funny thing is, you try to tell us what our definition is, and then when I tell you that the definition
Of
is
course.
wrong, you want to tell me
It's
that
not
I'm wrong.
wrong.
This is my theology
Because
and
it's
my
not wrong.
religion.
You literally
It's
said
not
the
yours.
exact same thing I said.
While you
Anointed
guys
by
were
God to
debating,
save people.
I was actually looking into it, and it's actually possible to have immaculate birth,
No, it's
but
not.
it's extremely rare.
So you're saying
not.
that
It's
it's
literally not
possible to
possible.
have for a woman to give birth with like without sperm from
It's
another
not
man?
Yes,
possible,
it
bro.
has
Yeah, like
happened
look,
No,
medically.
it's not. It literally
Okay,
has not
go
Guys,
do
happened.
the
just look.
homework
Never
and
happened
then
before.
come back because
guys,
you
No,
only
how
believe
about
in
this?
And
We're
on
science.
gonna
top
have a
of
You
one
that,
guys,
mic
like
It's
all
getting
like
policy.
this
it's
bone
like
marrow.
it's
you
like
have to
saying
prove it.
it's possible to
That's not
die
Calm down,
without
happening.
ever
Davinsky. Like,
being
why are you
alive.
yelling?
Jesus.
I'm not calm.
What?
Everyone else
It's
is
not
yelling over
possible.
each other. Drop the attitude.
Nah,
You
bro,
guys,
I'm gonna have the attitude. Nothing you can do.
guys, just do like a one mic policy that when one person's talking, everyone else mute their mic.
Of course.
So what we're not gonna do?
Nothing.
I'm going to
Cut
have
off
to
the
leave
moderator.
in a few minutes, but like I said, I really appreciate being here. I love the civil dialogue and debate. And I would love to do this more as we, go back and then find flaws in what each other have said or find flaws in what we have said. If we could come back and do this again, I would really enjoy it.
I just want to
Bro,
know how it's possible to give birth to someone, like a woman, with just a biological
bone
woman giving
marrow.
birth.
You can do it by scientific engineering. If I'm not mistaken, they're actually experimenting on it, and it has given positive results. If I remember correctly, like they use bone marrow to, yeah, to help lesbian couples to give
No, this
birth.
hasn't happened yet.
No, it's sperm
Nope.
in the egg. This is basic biology.
I mean, so
A
let's look
a
at it this
virgin
way.
walking.
Yeah,
Hang on.
yeah, of
The
course.
virgin walking down the street, right? She's never had sex. She's not going to get pregnant. As long as she doesn't come in contact with sperm, she's not going to get pregnant. That's just a fact.
Okay,
I've
then
read
go and explain
articles
those
and seen,
medical references. Yeah, it's happened, and you can't get past the fact that it's happened, even
It
outside
hasn't
of Christian
happened. It hasn't
theology.
happened.
I mean, it's called
Okay, then how do we
parthenogenesis.
have? Okay. So this is where I must end, but hopefully we can convene at another time. Have a
Can we have
wonderful
a
day.
part 2 to this debate? Because I don't
Yeah,
feel
that
like
would
we
be
came
great.
down to a conclusion yet.
Well, I
Part
mean, I don't
two.
think our
Where's Jesus
conclusions
the
are
true
going to
Yeah,
Messiah?
we never
change.
will.
This has been
We're
debated
never
No,
for
going
I-
to come down
2,000
to a
years.
conclusion.
No,
Yeah.
no, I think we can actually
Because
come
it's
down
the
to a
the
conclusion.
difference is
So,
the difference is between truth and fictional reality. That's the difference. We don't ever
Well,
we'll never agree.
if you already have a bias to believe that the entire Christian faith is a fictional
No,
reality, you're
the
already
bias isn't
biased.
towards Christianity. I live in a Christian nation. I've
So
already overcame that bias. You haven't.
okay, so you don't know anything about me. So firstly, you would understand that I've done an
Well,
entire
I can
deconstruction of
presume
my
that you're
faith.
still Christian since you're arguing it. I don't need to know anything about you besides that.
I mean,
Okay,
you can't
exactly.
just
So
refer
again,
to.
you make estimations on things you don't know, and you've been doing that the
I
entire
didn't make an
argument.
estimation.
So
That's a presumption.
if you can stop guesstimating and actually
didn't
start
guesstimate
taking
anything.
things for what they are, then you could actually have
Like
a
you're a Christian. That's all I
solid
presumed. I
argument.
don't need to know anything else about you.
That's all you
Arguing
presume.
in
But then
anger.
because you think I'm a Christian, you lump me in with everything you probably
No, I
know
don't. I'm
as a
arguing
Christian.
against what you specifically
Yes, you
said.
do. Yes, you
I
do.
don't.
So, but it's okay. But the thing about it is, if you're already going to come at me with an idea that everything I believe or what I know is fictional
No, it's
and
not
that you are somehow
everything you
correct,
believe. It's
you
this
are
specific
already
topic.
coming into
You
this
may have a whole
losing.
bunch of ideas that are true. I don't know about that. It's just, do you believe this specific thing? You do,
I mean,
therefore I believe this certain thing.
Okay,
yeah,
You
so
haven't
It's not about
if we
everything.
go
substantiated
in a
any actual
debate,
proof. You haven't
Yeah,
substantiated
there's
any
nothing.
proof is like Jesus was the Messiah. You can't prove that he was born
no,
of
so
God.
we
when you say if
can't get
Jesus was
past
the
the fact.
Messiah, you
Yeah,
already have to grant the fact that Jesus was there, because the claim here, the
We did. We
subject of
granted that in the
the
beginning.
sentence
Yeah,
would
we
be
said
the
that. We said that at
Messiah.
the beginning.
you
And
didn't
then
really
you
grant
guys still
it.
got nowhere.
Yeah, we
It
did at the
literally.
start of the
You
debate.
literally
After
did.
we debated whether Jesus was a real
Well,
person,
you
we said
just
we'll
Yeah,
conceded
grant
to
and
the
then
that.
fact
you
that
guys
with
failed. You
the
guys failed
evidence
to actually
given, no, we
provide
No,
didn't
but
evidence. So we
fail in
said,
any
no,
No,
way.
hey,
no, I think the
There's
evidence
no
is
that
strong
fail
that
or
literally
it didn't
happened.
succeed
exist.
here.
I think the
Everybody's
evidence
been
is
talking.
the
Nobody's
evidence.
failed or succeeded anything. You didn't provide
We
any
did. We
evidence
literally
again.
Well, I
said
provided that
earlier,
like
since
no
you
one
guys
has
failed.
documented Jesus during non-biblical sources until like 100 years after his death. I think that's enough proof to prove it. Like there's
Yeah,
like
No, it isn't. Just because something isn't written until later doesn't mean that it actually didn't happen. We have this with history. Look at this at the founding of the quote unquote Christian nation that I believe Xavier lives in. If it's not that nation, then it's somewhere else. And every nation has a specific history, and that history is biased. But that doesn't mean that none of it happened. That doesn't mean that just because we don't have first-hand accounts,
wait, hold
we
on. So
weren't
are
there
you
with
saying
the
that you
first-hand
believe in
account.
biased history?
hold on.
Is that what you're saying?
I actually
No, what
wanted
I'm
to add
saying
up on
is
that.
George
hang on, Sinji, you
Washington was
interrupted
not
Xavier.
writing his entire autobiography or the entire history
But the
about
difference
himself
is, no
where he
one
was
takes
going
George
through.
Washington's autobiography as like true fact. No one's like makes it their entire
And there's
worldview.
Of
also
course.
Okay,
documented
hold on.
Doesn't matter.
historians that mentioned
Nick,
George
can you
Washington.
moderate it?
That's the difference. Is there's documented,
Yeah.
there's other supporting evidence that George Washington existed. My point is that there's no outside non-biblical references that Jesus even existed, let alone he'd perform these supernatural
Okay.
fucking miracles. This is
Okay,
a
I
huge
have-
And
difference.
you seem to
Can
have
I
a problem
actually
with
finally have something out there, because there's no moderation here whatsoever?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
how am I supposed to moderate if no one listens?
I mean, the thing is also like,
I
according
don't have
to the
any
doctrine
fucking
of
tools. I
the
can't mute anyone.
universe.
that is true.
Also, I really don't stand behind the whole universe doctrine. From 10,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago, it's literally called the Dark Age. Like, almost nothing has been found or documented in that time period in history. So does that mean that none of those ancestors of yours existed at the time?
Wait, so
The Dark Ages
Ages
was
is
that
only
was a
specifically
consequence of
European.
Christianity. That was a consequence of Christianity
Also,
because
yeah.
they
I'm
like
talking about
burned.
10,000 to 100,000 years ago. I'm talking about
Okay.
like
That
a
wasn't Dark
different
Ages.
Also,
Though.
the Dark Ages
That's called
that's not a thing
prehistoric.
that happened
That's
everywhere.
before prehistory. Prehistoric means before written history. That's what it means. So obviously not.
Someone dropped out of the call.
No, not
It was
even 10,
Ro.
because according to this whole universe doctrine, like dinosaurs have been found. Like they have been, how do you say it? Observed, like the fossils and so on.
Okay.
But in the time span of 10,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago, almost no evidence was found, right? It's literally
No,
a
so the
gap
Dark
in
Ages
history.
is only in reference
Let
to
him
Europe.
just let him
That's
finish.
Western
Because
Europe.
RHO
That's not
left,
like the
so
entire
just let
world. Plenty
Shinji
of people
have like
did.
a longer turn to speak. Xavier and
Alright,
Davinsky. You guys are like over talking too much a bit. Like both,
Like,
like
it's,
yeah.
I forgot the exact term. It was something with dark, but from 10,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago, almost nothing of evidence was found in what happened in that period of time, right? So does that mean that the beings that existed in that time period didn't exist?
Huh?
I'm literally giving a time period, right? 10,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago, almost nothing of archaeological evidence has been found, and it's literally called like a dark age. I'm not talking about the Middle Ages where it's called the Dark Ages, but I'm talking about that period of time. 99% of all human evidence has been eradicated and can be found back.
So the simple answer to that is that we don't know what happened there. And we
Yeah,
don't.
none of
We
us
don't.
making
Hang on.
assumptions.
Let me finish. Let me finish. Hang on. You just asked something. Let me finish. You throw me off when you like jump in like that. So yeah, the difference is that like we don't know and we don't claim to know. And the same way that like the logical position is to say that, hey, we don't know if Jesus even existed or whether he was the Messiah because we simply don't know. All we have is biased text from biased sources. We don't have like anything else to go off. So it's more logical to conclude that like we don't know.
Okay, so you conceded from your point that he didn't exist, because the thing is, that doesn't mean that the people that lived 10,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago didn't exist, right? We can both agree on that.
I agree they
Simply
existed
means that
because
there's absence of
we
evidence.
can look at our genealogical like kind of we can look at our genes and go back. That's how we know that like there was earlier migrations. There was 100,000 years ago we knew that there were Neanderthals that migrated in that were like mixed up with humans. They went into Africa, and this is how the Africans today have also Neanderthal genes, even though that there was no Neanderthal population that lived there. So we know that people existed long before written history. I don't understand your point.
Yeah, yeah. Then,
No,
one thing
my
too.
point
So
was
no one,
simple.
we aren't even trying to prove any people existed at that time. Like no one wants to prove a specific person. We can prove people existed, but you're trying to prove a specific person existed at a specific time and did
No,
specific
you're
things.
missing my
So
point
there is
here.
there's no point here.
No,
It's like we're
like
not claiming that.
you're trying to use absence of evidence as a evidence for absence, right? When all
We're
other
trying to use
things.
absence of evidence as a lack of evidence that this thing existed, right? Not
Yeah,
necessarily
but
like
when you take a gnostic position where you claim that he definitely did not exist, right? That's already not provable because you're doing a affirmative, right?
we didn't
Although
say he
the
definitely
hold
didn't
on,
exist. We said you needed to prove he did.
but then we can't. We have to. You can't stand in the middle because the thing is, we need each side needs to take a stance, right, to have a proper
No, you
debate.
don't have to. Like, I don't know is always a fine answer. Like, does God exist? I don't know, but you need to prove it. Like, you don't have to prove. You don't have to pick a side.
So
It's not
this
necessarily
isn't
But
right.
really
based
a
on
debate.
hang on, based on the evidence that we have, the most logical position is it doesn't exist. It's the same as if you
Right,
say
right.
that. So
No,
making
that's
a
also
hang on, making a negative claim such as there are no green Martians. Like, that's illogical, and we can prove that to the best of our knowledge with what we have available. You can't expect us to scour every single galaxy and search for a green Martian. But based on what we know today, the logical position is that green Martians don't exist.
that's about likelihood, right? But if you
It's
say,
based
okay,
on what we know. It's based on what we know currently, right?
because you need to understand what the affirmative statement is. Like an affirmative, it doesn't mean that if you say this person did not exist, right? You're making an affirmative. You're claiming it's like that, like he didn't exist. But if you would say we don't know about his existence, that's an entirely different statement.
Did not is a negative claim.
No, it's you're affirming something. Like
No,
It's a
so
negative claim.
we debated the Shia cynical guy, whatever his name was. Yeah, so you're making the same mistake he made. Saying something did not exist is not a positive claim. A
I
positive
just
claim is
want
that something.
So
Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
this is from this philosophy of religion. This is University of New York. You cannot make the claim that, in brackets, miracles exist unless someone proves that they do not exist. The burden of proof, as presented below, applies to claims. Yada yada. So the burden of proof is always on the person making an assertion or proposition. Shifting the burden of proof is the fallacy of putting the burden of proof on a person who denies or questions the assertion being made. The source of the fallacy is the assumption that something is true unless proven otherwise. And that's back to the green alien example, is like, to our knowledge, they don't exist. So the most logical position there is green aliens don't exist until proven otherwise. So the burden of proof is on the person making the positive claim that they do exist. Like proof of a negative claim. So one cannot prove that ghosts do not exist. One cannot prove that leprechauns too do not exist. One can simply prove a negative, and one simply cannot prove a negative and general claim. Negative statements often make claims that are hard to prove because they make predictions about things we are not in practice unable to observe in a finite time. For instance, There are no big green Martians means there are no big green Martians in this universe or any. And unlike your bathtub, it is not possible to look in every corner of every universe, thus we cannot completely test this proposition. We can just look around within the limits of our ability and desires to expand time and resources on looking and prove that where we have looked so far and within our limits of knowledge, anything at all, there are no big green Martians. In such a case, we have proved a negative, just not the negative of the sweeping proposition in question. So there are certain negative claims that you can prove. Like, let's say that someone makes the claim that there is no, there's no apple in a closet, right? All you would have to do in that situation is look into the closet and show that there's no apple in the closet there. You've proved a negative. But it's very difficult to prove a negative or a general claim of that nature, especially in the terms of religion.
We're going to give Shinji the floor now.
Okay.
I mean, just like you said, if there's a location bound to it, like saying that there was no Jesus in that period of time and that location, you already have defined a location and a time.
Uh-huh.
And if there's opposing evidence to that, like for example the text of Josephus, Tacitus, and I forgot how to pronounce his name. Let me look back.
But these are biblical references, right? This is like quoting Harry Potter to prove that Harry Potter exists.
No, these people are outside Bible even. Josephus, Tacitus, and Suetonius.
This was 100 years after Jesus' death.
Yeah, these are Roman scholars. Yeah, after Jesus' death.
These are 100 years after his death, dude.
I actually have an article on that. So those people were actually influenced by Christians in the region as well. So like, you can't use those people as actual examples because they
the
weren't
Romans
even alive.
Went around and they like killed all the pagans and barbarians. Like there was a huge like resurgence of fucking Christianity by the Romans. So obviously they would have some biases as well. It's like the first Muslims, right, that like invaded Persia. They would have also like made positive claims about the existence of maybe like Muhammad or Allah. But you've got to look at people independently, and these weren't independent. They certainly weren't eyewitnesses. This is 100 years after. The same way that Plato, he claimed that Atlantis existed when apparently existed 9,000 years before he was even alive. So to like cite Plato for reference to prove that Atlantis existed is ridiculous, because obviously, who is he in that regard? He's a nobody.
How am I gonna... Hold on. Thinking of how to formulate.
We could invite some other people in here if you guys still want to talk. Otherwise, it's up to you. I don't mind keeping it going, but I don't know. What are you up to, Xavier?
It's kind of not. I'm not doing anything. I was just wondering because it's kind of not fair to Shinji because now it's a 2v1. You know.
Do you want to go into
back,
your chat, Shinji, on Ron's chat,
or we can just
church trolls.
We can give closing statements if you guys want.
I might look for someone else to join in. I'm messaging.
There's someone called Born Again Harapen who wanted to join, but I don't know if he's still watching.
I mean, we can just do this again, like with Ro and Shinji again, if you guys want.
We'd have to pick a new topic, though. I feel like something a bit more concise, because, we're kind of just arguing over the definition of Messiah. I still think that for a Messiah, there has to be a supernatural kind of origin story, such as being born from God. And I think the reason that Jesus proved himself through like miracles and whatnot, that would be to show that he had like these supernatural origin story. Like, it's not enough just to be born in this town from these people, apparently, because one of those persons that he had to be born from was God, right?
Because then you're just normal.
The problem is also like you have multiple instances of oral tradition. Like many places rely on oral tradition to this day. I might be mistaken. I'm not. This is speculation as far as I'm concerned. So I'm saying this sheer out of memory. So don't quote me on that. I could be wrong, but oral traditions still happen to this day. So for all those separate occurrences to be false, like all these eyewitnesses, people who took the gospel, that requires a huge conspiracy. Like
But
it's hard to.
these are eyewitnesses. These are unverified accounts. So what I read earlier in my introduction, right, is 1 second. The earliest sources only reference the clearly fictional Christ of faith. These early sources, compiled decades after the alleged events, all stem from Christian authors eager to promote Christianity, which gives us reason to question them. The authors of the gospel fail to name themselves, describe their qualifications, or show any criticism within their fundamental sources, which they also fail to identify. So these witness, you can, like, for instance, I can write a book and I can be like 10,000 people witness this, but how are we actually going to verify that? Do we just take it at word value from the book that you're citing to prove your point? I don't know. It seems a bit circular.
So
I had a debate with a Jewish guy about this. So apparently at some mountain, a lot of the Jews, they fell into the earth, the sky opened up. And his whole argument was basically, well, how could all these people that saw it, how could they lie? But we don't know they all saw it, because how do we independently verify that, hey, like this many people saw it? We just got to take it at like text value and be like, okay, so they saw 10,000 people saw it. That means 10,000 people saw it, right? That's a lot of people, but we don't know 10,000 people saw it. And like we didn't get independent testimonies from these 10,000 people. It's the same with the story about Jesus. What did he do? He fed like 4,000 people, turned like bread into water. Bread and water into fish, and fed 4,000 people. Like we can take that at face value and be like, oh, 4,000 independent witnesses. But is it really? How do we know 4,000 people saw it besides from the text, from the source which you're actually quoting to prove your point?
Yeah, and also
and
I find it kind of
also
funny.
like
Sorry.
I'm sorry. The thing is also like you didn't have like one instance of like at this point one person decided to document the Bible from the oral traditions. You have various instances that relied on different oral traditions, having the same message, of course, but separate branches of like separate generations that chose to write it down. And as I'm reading, there's like 9,300 manuscripts that ended up being written independently, and they matched up to like 99.9% of the original gospel, with some
So,
flaws here and there.
so you're telling me that 9,000 people wrote a testimony about like the Bible being correct?
No, they basically documented, like wrote it on written scripture, let's say, from the oral traditions. So they heard it and they wrote it down. Even if it's way later than the time of Jesus, it's still instances that relied on the oral traditions that
Yeah,
passed down
that's like
independently.
Chinese whispers though. Like that's like getting a story for like 200 years later. It's passed down through generations to generations, and then that generation, I don't know, 200 years removed from the first incident, they're like, oh, okay, let's all write this down, and then we're like, we're gonna. That doesn't solidify anything.
No, but
If it's
if
not,
it, hold on, if these oral traditions spread out, right? Like one went, let's say, to France, and the other went to, let's say, Constantinople, and they both write down what they hear in the gospel, and they match up. It shows that the branching has a different direction it went into, right? So it can't be from the same lineage of gospel, like from generation to generation. It had to be from two different lineages. Like for example, at the time, let's say at the time of Jesus, to simplify, like 3 people here heard it, right? I'm downscaling the amount of people here. Like one person heard it and he passes on the gospel to its next generation. And then the future generations continue this tradition. They decide to move to France. And the other person continues this gospel to their lineage, and they decide to go to Constantinople. Like these two instances are two separate branches. And if they then at some point decide to write it down and document it and it matches perfectly without any changes, it would only solidify that.
I mean, you can have these ancient sagas that go on for hours. The Norse people did it. There's a few people in the I think it's Kyrgyzstan. These mantras about their entire origin story, word for word, they're passed down generation to generation from village to village, and they match up perfectly. This is how like language. This before written language, right? This is how we pass down stories. So like we can have free, like you, me, and Xavier can be like. Let's go back to the time of Jesus. We see him turn bread and water into fish. You, me, and Xavier, we saw it, right? And then we moved to 3 different
Water
countries.
into fish? I'm sorry. You mean wine?
Yeah, water and bread into fish and wine. Wasn't that the story?
No, like he multiplied the bread and fish and he turned water into wine.
Okay, well, you get what I'm saying. It's not
Yeah,
important.
I get you. Like it was funny. That's it.
So when we let's say we all witness this, right? And then we all move to different countries. Maybe you move to Sweden. Maybe I move to Italy. Xavier moves to, I don't know, Lebanon. And then we pass down this story to our lineage, to our grandsons, to our great grandsons, and it just passes along. And then maybe our great 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 grandson writes down what initially we told our descendants. This doesn't really prove anything. It just proves that stories can be transmitted verbally and then written down.
Yeah, but not with the amount of original people that took it. Because I also said that it's downscaled a lot. So the original amount of people, like they all had to, yeah, basically follow up with this lie of their testimony with the same exact story. That's why the police, when they interrogate like a group of criminals, I forgot the term of this technique. They would basically.
Separate
Oh
them,
yeah,
right?
it's the prisoner's dilemma, if I'm not mistaken, where they take the group, they separate each other, and if they all testify for the same story, is most likely true. But if one of them contradicts the other while being in separation, it's probably a false story. Does that make sense?
I get what you're saying, but at the same time, it's like if these people had, like, if they really believe, not if they even believed it, but if they really wanted to spread this message down and they get their story, like if they had, I don't know, 10 years to plot out, okay, this is what happened. Yeah, you got that. Yeah, it's the same as mine. You collaborate, you make sure it's like, it's like, let's say you do a crime and you have time to kind of plan amongst yourself an alibi. If you have enough time, then it's going to match up. So
I
usually,
mean,
like in those
that's
police
like a huge.
interrogations, for
I'm sorry.
instance, they're taken out of unsuspectedly, like they're taken suddenly, and they don't have time to corroborate with each other and make sure that their stories align. But you can definitely have like fake stories that you pass down through generations that are going to align, even if they're split from different branches, as long as the initial corroboration is, I guess, sound.
And the thing is, the stories don't even have
Yeah.
to be fake. Like these people could actually believe they perceive that thing. But like in today's time, we can actually realize that, well, maybe these people seen something and they didn't understand what it is, or something like that. It doesn't have to be fake, but it just wasn't. It's not truly aligned to how we perceive reality now. Is like the biggest thing.
I mean, that's the whole argument behind like Jesus being a con man. Like, I'm not so good at verbalizing it. Like, if Ro was here, he could explain it way better than I could. But the thing is, this isn't like a small amount of people who witnessed it. Like, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people who, even at one instance where they witnessed Jesus multiplying the bread and fish. So, with that huge amount of people, the margin of error would be there if it was false. Like
But
you
my
can
point
like sit.
again is that it's these these witnesses, okay, we can say that 4,000 people witness it, but we have no way to actually verify this number and cross-examine these people. So we just have to take it at face value, which I don't think is very sound. It's not a very strong argument.
Yeah, and I guess that's true because, like, let's say I was to write some sort of personal account right now. I was to say, 6,000 people witnessed me fly. Well, the only way you actually would prove that is if those people came out of their own accord and actually stated that they seen it, not if I said that I saw them say it or
And
believe
it's
it.
also conditioning. Like, let's say that you already are kind of on board with a movement, like a cult. Like, I don't know, like what's that Jonestown massacre? He killed about 1,000 people. I'm sure that these people, like, let's say that he performed some quote unquote miracle, they would be more likely to believe it and like see what they want to see than taking a random other selection of 1,000 people and placing them next to each other. Like, you can have people that witness the same event but have totally different interpretations of what just took place. And these guys have already been conditioned to believe a certain way. Therefore, they're going to be way less critical of what they saw.
Right.
Nick, do you want to jump in and say any thoughts? Or
I mean, backtracking back to like the definition part, I posted some things in like the private chat there that you can read. It was like more about what Shinji was talking about and like the definition of Messiah and like the prerequisite basically.
the book of Isaiah outlines Israel and the nation's coming judgment while pointing to the future hope of a new covenant and the coming Messiah. The book of Isaiah outlines Israel and the nation's coming judgment while pointing to the future hopes of a new covenant and the coming Messiah. According to the tradition, first appearing in the Talmud compendium of Jewish law redacted in Babylon at 500 CE. The book of Isaiah was written. What do you mean? I don't understand.
So basically, like that book prophesies Jesus, and like the Jewish people, like the Christian belief is that like the Jewish people misinterpreted it, and like as Shinji was saying, like I guess like they were corrupt or whatever, like so yeah, like basically this book was written 715 to 680 before Christ.
Uh-huh.
And like yeah, I guess like Shinji, is that like correct, or you have to input on that, or
Like, basically, you're saying that the Bible has been corrupted, or
no?
like,
I'm saying that like the Jewish like Talmud, like book of Isaiah, the Old Testament basically prophesizes Jesus, right?
mm-hmm.
And that's the definition of the Messiah, like
Yeah, basically.
essentially, right? Yeah, and that's like what you guys were trying to say.
Because the Jewish leaders sure didn't make it easier for us. Like, it was even said in the Bible, although you guys don't like me quoting Bible, but if we go by the story of the Bible, the Jewish leaders were already opposing Christ. So if someone is opposing someone and they don't want him to be successful, like if you put yourself from their perspective, like some guys going around claiming to be the Messiah, and that person is exposing your deeds. He's exposing like you using the temples for merchandise, things that like basically the love of money. You're wanting to silence him at all costs. And that's why the
Sure.
crucifixion was there at the first place. So that clears out the reason why the Jewish rabbis refused to write about him in the first place. Because the whole intention behind it was to silence him from the get go.
So what if we take we take, I guess, non-secular Jews of today, because you can look at communities, the city community in New York, for instance, Like they're really against like material possessions. They don't own TVs in their house. They don't have internet. Like they really like limit themselves to worldly possessions. So these people, if they really saw that there was evidence that Jesus was the Messiah according to the criteria, then they would convert. It's kind of like a conspiracy that you're saying that these Jews were just so corrupted that they wanted to just deny when the proof was in the pudding.
I mean, the thing is, even those non-secular Jews, they don't like the book of Isaiah for a reason. Because in the biblical context, everything in the book of Isaiah, and even in the book of Genesis, when the promise was made to Abraham, supports Christ. Although they don't censor Genesis, they really don't like the topic of the Messiah. Like, they're still waiting for a quote-unquote Messiah, but while not seeing that he has already come. So even those Hasidic Jews, they don't really like the book of Isaiah. Like, this is basically universal for, yeah, Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like they deem it as a non-canon. It's still intercanon, but yeah, they don't refer to it. They don't preach it. And they take perhaps part of it, but they don't preach, for example, Isaiah 53, Isaiah 9, Isaiah 59, Isaiah 53, and Isaiah 43. Like, all of this is heresy to them.
Right.
I mean, honestly, I don't know if really any of this even goes to prove anything. Like, I don't know. It's all still written in like the same radius. Like, and even I posted something in the chat. Like, most modern scholars agree that these chapters cannot be describing prophecies by the original Isaiah, whether written by Hezekiah or not. They had to have been written by someone living after the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BCE. The original Isaiah lived more than a century earlier, so could not have said, "Speak ye comfortably to Jerusalem, and cry unto her, that her warfare is accomplished, that her iniquity is pardoned, for she hath received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins." So even that book, like, there's not even any saying that whether or not anything was to come true or any of the prophecies actually would have occurred. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Can you like elaborate a bit? Because I don't exactly get your
Well,
point here.
I assume that you guys are kind of using this book as like some sort of basis to prove whether or not like Jesus existed. Like, you know, you
Oh
said the
no, that's not
Jews
what I was. I'm sorry to
didn't
interrupt, but
like this book. Okay.
because I'm rather arguing why the Jews at the time and why the Jews nowadays don't like that book. It's not even relevant to Jesus' existence, this
Oh, okay.
argument that I'm bringing up. It's like the reason
Sorry.
why they favor the book of Isaiah.
Right. Okay.
So, I mean, Jesus visited tons of places. So you can say that the Jews were corrupted, but were the like Egyptians, were the Lebanese also corrupted into like, because there's been no, what I'm saying is there's no non-biblical references of Jesus even existing, right? But why would the Egyptians, you can say that for the Jews, but hey, like, you know, they didn't want to accept it because they had this other desire. But why would the Egyptians, the Lebanese, who don't believe in Judaism, also not write about him or at least document him?
The thing is, when he went to Egypt, if I'm not mistaken, it's because he wanted to hide. Like, he was basically hiding away from the persecution, because when Jesus was born in Bethlehem, the kings of that time were trying to, yeah, get rid of Jesus, because at the time he had all the requirements of birth of what it is to be the Messiah. So he had to go and hide in Egypt, and there was no real interaction in Egypt between Jesus and the people there. So not until he returned to Galilee and went to Nazareth, and then he moved on to the rest of Judea and Galilee. And that's why his title became Jesus of Nazareth. Because, yeah.
He stayed in Egypt apparently for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, like, do you have any? Can you prove any of the supernatural things that Jesus proclaimed to have done, or what the Bible proclaims that Jesus did?
I could present like even those four historians, right? You could say they're influenced, but only in the way of being Jews, like that would refer to the Old Testament.
Which 4 historians?
Like basically Josephus, Tacitus, and Suetonius, which weren't actually Christian. You say they were influenced, but they would perhaps be influenced by the Old Testament, but not by Christianity, since they were basically Jewish historians.
But my point is that this is we had this debate on Discord the other day. So it happened 100 years after his death, and from what you told me, they all saw at the same time Jesus appear from the sky, right?
Yeah, like in the sky with angels and so on.
It's like back to my like analogy with let's take an underdeveloped country like Somalia. Let's say that you get 2 historians in Somalia that came out today, and technology is far more advanced today. So scholarship, even in like Somalia, like the university systems in Somalia, has got to be like more, I guess, solid than ancient Rome, like 2,000 years ago. So let's say 2 historians from a different part of Somalia looked up in the sky and they saw Allah and they saw some miracle, and they confessed, "Hey, look, we saw this. This is proof." Would you believe them?
If they give reasoning and yeah,
By what
if
reasoning?
if they lived far away from each other and their testimonies were the same, yeah.
You'd believe them and you'd drop Christianity and convert to Islam?
The problem with Islam is rather that the Prophet Muhammad was corrupted. But if you actually follow
Corrupted in what sense?
because if you look at the writings of Muhammad later on, he became more greedy and more uh, desireful for earthly possessions like gold, silver, treasures, and so on.
But maybe that was God's will. So you're projecting like a Christian morality framework onto Islam. So
No,
that
but
shouldn't
that
really
was
matter.
from his own sayings and not of God's will. Because the thing is, when Muhammad started, he actually went from the narrative of Ishmael, and Ishmael was also documented in Christianity, and the corruption that happened was basically from Muhammad and not Allah. And a lot of Muslims won't like this answer, but that's basically what it is.
We can take Islam out of the equation. Let's say that 2 historians who went to university, they got their degree in Mogadishu. And
Mogadishu.
is that right? It's Mogadishu, isn't it?
I don't
That's the
even know where that is.
It's the capital of Somalia.
Why
So
do
they
you
went
like Somalia so much?
because my point is, like, this is an underdeveloped country, right? So I'm comparing an underdeveloped country that still has probably a stronger academic like credence than Rome 2,000 years ago. Like, historians that come out of Mogadishu University with a degree would be more reliable than the historians that lived in Rome 2,000 years ago. Like, there's been so much evolution in academia in terms of history, to the point where, like, that's pretty much undeniable, even in an underdeveloped country. So if you take like 2 village people that got their degree, and they saw, I don't know, like a blue dragon come from the sky, and the dragon talked to them and said, "Hey, like, this is the new religion. It's the blue dragon religion." So that takes away the corruption element. If you want to like critique Islam, would you convert to the blue dragon religion?
So basically, they come down and say that everything was corrupted and that he saw blue dragons.
No, there's two Somali academics. They're in different parts of the country, and at the same time, they write down that they saw a blue dragon come from the heavens and say, "Hey, this is the real religion. I'm a blue dragon. Follow me." Maybe he gave it like some commandments, and then they documented that, and then they published it, and then you read it, and you're like, "Oh shit! I mean, two historians saw this, so it must be true."
I mean, if they were far away from each other, and if they were not in contact with each other, and if they were unbiased, then yeah, that would be a strong claim.
I wouldn't say that's a strong claim. Like,
I mean, yeah,
it's
because
a
there's things that could
claim, but there's
influence
no
those people.
supporting. There's no supporting evidence. That's also like back to the analogy with, I don't know, like the Civil War. Like, religious people often bring this up. How do we know the Civil War happened? And it's not just because someone documented it. We can have a historian who's like world renowned historian, but documented the Civil War, right? But we wouldn't just take that as face value. We'd also have to have supporting evidence, such as the mass graves, such as like the wounds that are consistent with weaponry of that time, such as the weaponry of that time. So it's not.
Yeah.
I don't think a statement from a historian is proof enough to justify believing in something. Like, there has to be supporting evidence as well, because what you're doing is basically like an appeal to authority, isn't it?
I mean, it's rather using it as a peer-to-peer evaluation, like, and likelihoods that if four people note down the same exact thing while being so far away and like barely any room for collaboration, it's pretty hard to make up the same narrative by luck and coincidence.
Well, from what I saw, it was two. It was two. It was a Roman scholar, Josephus, and historian Tacardicus. The two of them, right? And like, who knows? But if they had like, they could have met up like 5 weeks earlier and said, "Yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to convince these Europeans that Christianity is real. Here's the story. We're going to collaborate the same story at the same time." It's not like these people are
Not
like,
to mention,
okay. Hang on. Let me say it like, hang on. Let me just finish this point. So like, that's like way less believable. If you want to just take like historians, like their word for it, what would be like way more believable is like, let's say that there was also a historian in Egypt. There was a historian in the Aztec Empire. There was a historian in, like, I don't know, some Eskimo village that dated to the exact same time, and they all saw it. There's way less room for like collaboration and corruption with their story than taking two Romans. This is my biggest thing with Christianity is like, why did God decide to just infiltrate one small section of the world and just ignore the other? Like, I don't know how many people,
this is
but
the
maybe a
Abrahamic
billion
religions
people.
at all.
All right, yeah.
Like the
Let
religions
Shinji,
originate from like a radius of like
speak.
100 miles. Like all three.
Because
Like, why
he came
ignore
for
the Aboriginals for 50,000 years? Why ignore the Irish? Why ignore, like, I don't know, Sudanese people? Like, why just concentrate on these random desert people?
Guys.
But then that becomes a topic of why God chose to help out one certain group of people first. Because Jesus said himself, he came first to help out the Israelites from the corruption and evil they were doing. Like, that was his main focus.
But you don't think other countries had corruption and evil at the same time? It's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, but
What
that
I
was the
think that-
people of God in the first place.
Don't you think like it would have been more beneficial from like a logical point, just saying you're God? Wouldn't it be more beneficial to take, I don't know, like the Roman Empire, something that had way more expansion than anything that came out of like, I don't know, Bethlehem at that time, or the Mongols, for instance? Like, the Mongols covered what, like 70% or something of like Eurasia. Like, taking an expansive empire like this compared to taking this tiny little section of the earth with, it just seems really strange. But they didn't really have too much influence either.
Also, like, the thing is, I don't know how exactly you would like try to find evidence, like hardcore evidence for something that was perceived like an observation in the sky. Like, it's not like one angel will fall dead and be fossilized into the ground, right? Because
it would also be like collaboration. So like, let's say Tacardicus.
But
like,
if you claim that they collaborated, you need to provide evidence that they did, right? That's
No,
still a
I'm talking
positive claim,
about.
even outside
I'm,
of Christianity.
I'm talking about if he was a true historian, like if he was such a great historian and to be believed just by his word alone, surely he wasn't the only person besides from this other guy that saw Jesus appear from the clouds. He would have gone out to like the villages and the towns, and he would have got like collaborating eyewitness accounts. He wouldn't just wrote it down himself. Like that would be the most like strongest evidence you could get, and instead of just taking his word at face value. Because like you can like historians, like no one's perfect. You can be the most like world-renowned historian at the time, and you can go through dementia. You can, I don't know, trip on shrooms. You can even like get delusional. Maybe they didn't sleep for 5 days and they're seeing fucking hallucinations, which can happen after not sleeping.
But then they saw the same hallucination
That's possible too. Like
independently
you
from
know,
each
like
other.
I've heard people that take DMT, a lot of them see the same kind of visual effects. The same with like mushrooms, for instance. Like a lot of people see swirling. So like certain drugs can definitely.
Yeah, but that's because the thing is, there's a scientific explanation for that. For example, if I'm not mistaken with DMT, when you take, I don't know if it's DMT, but one certain drug makes you hallucinate in a way where you actually perceive the brain in itself, right? Instead of like using the outside world as like visuals, your brain confuses everything inside the brain. Like usually the neurons that make a pathway would function in a certain way where they would create a vision that's not even there. Like even the swirls, it's different than seeing an actual object, right? Like for example, seeing Jesus, that's a sophisticated shape where you can tell, yeah, that's Jesus and angels next to it.
Not
It's not like
necessarily though, like because like these people.
it's
So
different
like
than
if you want to,
swirls.
I just want to say this: like if there's no clear depiction of Jesus in the Bible. I did the debate with that the American guy that lives in Russia not too long ago, and the only depiction of Jesus in the Bible is very metaphorical. Like they say that his eyes were red. They said that his voice gashed like a river. Like there's no actual depiction of what Jesus looked like. So how would these two Roman historians know that hey, this is Jesus? It could be another god as well. They're just like they're obviously thinking it's Jesus, but based on what?
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, give me a second. I think there is a painting from 37 AD, from what Jesus would have looked like. And it was cut on an emerald at the request of Tiberius Caesar at 37 AD. Around the
That's still
time Jesus
37
was
years
killed.
after. That's still 37 years after he died.
No, 37 years after he was born.
After he was born, 30. When did he die?
To year 35, if I'm not mistaken.
So 3 years. Hang on.
2
Which year?
years. I think
Was he
died
dead
around.
or alive during this time when it was painted?
It was 2 years after his death. And
Even
he was
2 years after his death is like
and he was white, apparently, according to the painting.
confirmed.
And it's actually in the Library of Congress, so it's not very long after, yeah, his crucifixion. So people who would have seen him, yeah.
You know how people perceive you can be different from how others perceive you, though? Even your perception of yourself. Like, you get, like, two people to describe the same person. They might give you, like, a different kind of... Someone might be like, oh, he has a big nose. Someone might be like, oh, his nose isn't that big. You can misremember eye color. There's even a debate over which was Hitler's eye color, because there are, like, during his lifetime, there's both... There's documentation from Nazi officials that have quoted him as having blue eyes. Others have said brown eyes. So, like, that's what I'm saying is, like, we don't really know how he looked based on that as well, because whose perception, whose story got down the line to this artist that painted the picture.
Yeah, but that's more about the observation of something and then writing it down, right? But then both would still imply that there was an existence, because if you're gonna make a painting of Jesus 2 years after his passing away, then it's not even that long after he got crucified and resurrected.
Yeah, but my point is that these depictions of how Hitler looked and his eye color was during when he was alive. And your eye color doesn't change like that in that amount. You don't go from blue to brown eyes that quickly, right? So, like, if you can misremember like a simple thing such as eye color, like we can't really take these records of how Jesus looked when there's not even references of how he looked in the Bible.
But also, that's a separate topic of how Jesus looked like, rather than, if Jesus existed or not.
Yeah, but that's what my point is you said that the Roman historians looked at the sky and they knew it was Jesus because he looked like Jesus. But how the hell do they know what Jesus looked like?
It's not about whether they have seen Jesus before, but the fact that they saw like a being in the sky with angels surrounding them. For all they could know, they could have been wrong and they saw literally God. I mean, Jesus is God in the flesh, but that's a separate topic. They would
Or
have
like,
all took the estimated guess that the being they saw was Jesus, right? Because they saw angels surrounding him, and yeah.
because that was the ideology at the time that was most prevalent. For all we know, like, let's just take this, like, let's just say that this is real and what they saw was real. That could have been a god. That could have been like someone that lived 5,000 years ago in the Middle East that also claimed to be the prophet. And maybe that was who came. Like, we don't know that that was Jesus. Did he say that he was Jesus when he was in the sky with his horses?
I mean, I'm not sure if he spoke.
It could have been like, dude, it could have been like, who's that Norse god? The one with the lightning. What's his name?
Thor.
Yeah, Thor. It could have been Thor. Like,
I mean, the thing is, just like Ro, I'm a henotheistic Christian, which meaning that doesn't mean that I'm polytheistic. It means simply that I deny the godhood of these other gods, as they claim. I simply believe that they aren't supreme and by definition wouldn't be God. But they exist. They're like fallen angels or disobedient, blasphemous children of the supreme God. Did someone join?
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, Ron, what's up?
Okay, so Davinsky, you're saying that I'm not sure if Shinji brought up the depiction of Jesus, right? But in the Bible, it says he's bronze skin, so he's not even white. The Catholic Church has been trying to change his image, so we worship a fake white Jesus.
The Catholic Church
hang on,
didn't even exist at that time.
I just want to go through that quote because this is what I actually did a debate on the race of Jesus, and the only real depictions of Jesus is a completely metaphorical depiction. So it says that his feet were bronze, like bronze. It said that his eyes were red. It said his voice rushed like the sound of a river. Clearly, this isn't a physical depiction of Jesus if he even existed. This is purely metaphorical. So just to say, like, oh, his feet were bronze, therefore he is bronze. I mean,
it's pretty literal in the Bible. But what's it called? Even
it also said his hair was white.
What tribe was Jesus from?
Judah.
Okay, now what tribe was Samson from?
Who?
Samson.
Not sure.
Okay, Judah. Now, in the Bible, all right, I can give you a verse. It says that Samson had 7 dreadlocks. Now, where do dreadlocks come from? Black people. So
there was also hang on. There was dreadlocks in Viking culture in Greek culture.
That's not dreadlocks.
They dreaded their hair in Viking.
That's not
Greek
dreadlocks,
culture.
though.
Of course it is. If you dread your hair, it's
not
dreadlocks.
Those are not dreadlocks.
Dude, if you don't wash your hair for like months, it's going to dread naturally. You don't have to be black to have dreads.
No, it's not.
It will. Of course it will.
No, it would not. Bro, that's not dreads. That's just you having dirty hair. Now,
which were dread.
no. It will literally just like compile mold on it. But what's it called? Compared to dreads, right, from the nappy hair, it actually, you form the dread. You twist the dread, right? And Sansone's hair was very special. And remember, he had 7 dreads. And also, Jesus wasn't somebody that looked beautiful. In the Bible, it says that Jesus was made like not in a very beautiful
Hold on, are you
image.
being racist? Are you calling black people not beautiful? Racist.
Hey man, I don't give you the Bible. Hey man, where's Roe?
Oh, he had to go. He has a student to attend to.
Oh, man.
Historians have uncovered Roman accounts stating that the Celts wore their hair like snakes, and several Viking tribes. Hang on. So, I mean, dread is kind of vague. Just you can have dreads and not be black, right?
I mean,
In
that wasn't
ancient
even the
Greek,
point I was trying to make here.
hang on. In ancient Greece, for example, some of the earliest depictions of dreads date back to 3600 BC.
Hello?
Yo. So I'm waiting for the claim of France saying that Jesus was Mexican.
We better maybe we'll end this live and before it gets a bit too
Yeah, just
heated.
let's get on voice call.
Yeah, right. Okay, I'll post this up and then nice debate. Thank you everyone for
Yeah.
joining. Thank you Nick for moderating and maybe we'll do this again another time. We'll pick a different topic.
Yeah.
But I feel like we covered a lot of area with this, so I don't know what more there is to really cover.
If there's a way to like give me actual like mod powers where I can like mute people, then I can actually like stop people from talking over each other.
I mean, I can take care of that if Davinsky would trust me.
Hang on.
All he needs to do is hold on. All he needs to do is like give me his stream code, like his stream key, and I would install OBS and I would stream, and we could do this in a server.
I mean, it's not really like fair to have
Nick,
a moderator for one of the like debaters. You know what I mean? It doesn't really make sense to have that.
Click on my profile or click on Sinji's profile and see, because I have the ability to mute. Maybe I could give someone mod powers. Surely that's a thing. Hang on, let me try to figure this out. Settings. Yes.
Can you mute people?
I can mute people, yeah.
There was like some moments like when RHO was here where you guys were like talking over each other and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think RHO was doing that the most though. It was hard to get a sentence
honestly,
in with that guy.
Nah, like let's be unbiased here. Like Xavier did cut him off a lot of times.
They're both kind of noted to each other, but then when I would jump in, he would cut me off, and then I don't know. I feel like he didn't really let Xavier finish his points.
It was like a mix of both. Like RHO did go on long, like you know what I mean. Like his answers were long, and then it's like when someone would like interject, he would like kind of cut their answer off a bit. Like I can see that, but like also it's like when it went off the rails, like you guys were doing the same thing. So I don't know. It's like.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty cordial until probably 45 minutes into it, maybe 40 minutes into it, and then I mean, I started cutting him off because he was cutting me off, and then Sinji's like, "Oh, stop yelling!" But I wasn't even yelling; I was just speaking more loudly to talk over people that wouldn't let others speak.
I'm used to you talking like very calmly, silently, but at that time you were talking very loud.
I may have been talking loud into the mic, but like that's not yelling. Like yelling is like, "Oh, no, 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 no."
Not yelling. You were pretty excited. Would be a better term.
I mean, excitement. It gives the debate something. I don't see that as a bad thing.
But I also felt for Nick because honestly, as a moderator, you should have some perms. Because, well, like, is he gonna do? Like, jump in 4 people or 3 people having a debate, like yelling at each other?
Yeah, I still feel
Like,
like
you
he
can.
could have interjected and said like, "Don't speak," because he did say at the beginning, "Don't speak," and then I would have backed him up, and then he could have been like, "Okay, Sinji, then Xavier, then yada yada." He could have done
Like
that.
that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say, why don't you guys do like a 2-and-2 thing? Like one person says something and then like the other like person on their side can add on if they want, and then you have to let the other side like rebuttal, and you can't interrupt.
I mean,
That, yeah,
to
that's
add.
probably would have been optimal.
There's no punishment to like for someone interrupting, so obviously someone's gonna do it, right?
I mean, I did my best to not interrupt. Like, and when I did, I usually say like, "Can I interject?" and stuff like that.
No, yeah, I know. It was more like, all right, RHO was like a little bit like,
I mean, Xavier and RHO
yeah,
basically
that too,
these two.
yeah, Xavier too.
These two were. But RHO wasn't that like pushy with his interruption. Like he simply had long explanations as someone wants to interject, but he keeps wanting to finish his point. Yeah, so it wouldn't be interrupting. It's like he's giving this explanation, someone else interjects, but then he wants to finish his explanation, and that might be seen as interrupting.
I see
I
what
mean,
you mean. Yeah,
we can play it back. There were definitely points where I like got like half a sentence in, and then he's like, "Oh," blah, blah, blah. And then I have to speak more animated, and then yeah.
Also, can you add Ron back? He asks.
It's probably not. I mean, we're concluding the debate, and I don't want him to say anything, but we'll take this down. So we'll end it now, and we'll jump into maybe the Discord. If Ron wants to shout out his Discord now, Ron, write down your Discord in the comments,
Into
and
YouTube.
yeah, I can shout it out. I mean, I can post the link, but I don't think you can click links, can you? In the
You can.
hang on, I'll post his chat to the actual room. It's the Truth of Jesus one, right?
Mm-hmm. It's that one.
Post message.
But the biggest problem, like RSO and I had, is that we didn't want the term Messiah to be conflated with a semantic shift that we have nowadays, because we can't apply like the modern day pop culture definition of Messiah. When the Bible talks about Messiah, we need to, yeah, approach that definition of that time period with those conditions.
Yeah, I understand that, and but at the same time, the conditions of the Messiah still have a supernatural origin. So there is still a supernatural element to being a Messiah because you have to be born from the seed of God, right? Like, so to ignore the supernatural aspect completely and be like, "Oh, you're the Messiah as long as you're born in this village to this parent," I think that's kind of
I mean,
I don't know.
also the situation that he had to be born into, and yeah, but lineage and yeah, the life story
And it's also
and being sinless.
we have to take the Bible's interpretation of him meeting those criteria, and we have to firstly like recognize that, and that would be for you to prove. If you do believe he was the Messiah under these conditions, you'd have to prove that he met these conditions,
Yeah,
and that's not possible to prove. You can't prove that you're half God or like the Son
I
of
mean,
God or God itself.
we came to that topic later on, but in the beginning, like, I know who it was, whether it was you or Xavier. The definitions were being mixed up, right? That's why I brought up the examples of words having different meanings depending on the context.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, like if we're
Yeah,
gonna,
I understand what you're saying by saying like you have to look at the biblical interpretation of the Messiah, but I don't think that my interpretation of the Messiah was that different. Like because there is still a supernatural origin to it, so there is still a supernatural element to Jesus, and that would kind of go down the line of what he produced later in life.
but I could be wrong, but the conditions were more about him being sinless and being born of a lineage, and on top of that, being, yeah, fulfilling the prophecy of salvation, or being a redeemer, basically.
Yeah, and like in order to be the prophecy of salvation and be able to like save mankind, you'd have to like you could. It doesn't matter if you're born from this lineage and born from this village. There's also a supernatural element to that. Like no human can be like the savior in terms of a spiritual afterworld.
Because Jesus wasn't a human, he was God in the flesh, but that's a separate debate.
Okay. Well, maybe I think I'll try about Ron
Actually,
in one
hold
time,
on.
and then
We can do that as a
Can anybody hear me?
following debate.
Ron, just don't say anything like offensive or like.
Yeah, can you guys hear? Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yeah, we
sir.
can hear you.
Yeah, so I got disconnected, but I was gonna say this, right? So the back then with the Jew rabbis, right, or rabbis, whatever you want to call them in Hebrew, and a lot of people back then, none of them said that Jesus wasn't real. They just didn't believe he was the Messiah. They thought he was a magician.
Say that again.
Bruh. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I was saying is, back then, around when Jesus was existing, you know, he still exists, Yahushua HaMashiach, right? Forever and ever. The Jew rabbis and the people that, you know, existed at that time, none of them said Jesus wasn't real. They just said that he wasn't the Messiah. So they didn't disprove that Jesus was real or not. They just said he wasn't the Messiah. But they seen him existing in the body, in the flesh.
But there's no documentation of Jesus existing outside of biblical records.
Oh, there is. He's in
Can you
Roman
provide one?
records.
The Roman records came out 100 years after his death.
Can you define came out? Like, can you define that really quick?
So I can reread what I read earlier. There are no existing eyewitnesses or contemporary accounts of Jesus. All we have are later descriptions of Jesus' life events by non-eyewitnesses, most of which are obviously biased. Little can be gleaned from the few non-biblical or non-Christian sources, with only Roman scholar Josephus and historian Tertullus having any reasonable claim to writing about his death within 100 years of his life. So from what I've seen, unless you can provide another source, but
Can you
Okay,
send those
so
sources they claim? Of the
what
Roman-
about
I'm going to post them all to
what
the
about
comment
Caesar?
section.
What about Caesar? The man that had a conversation with
Tiberius
Jesus.
Caesar? No,
Oh.
that was a centurion. That wasn't a Caesar.
No, Caesar. The man that what's it called? You know, took Jesus and he showed them and he was like, do I have like he was asking the people, should I kill him? What should we do to him? And everybody was saying sacrifice him.
Pilate. You mean Pilate?
No, that was Caesar.
No, that was Pilate.
Oh, are you sure?
Yeah, it was Pilate.
I could have sworn it was Caesar.
Perhaps that's his first name. Not sure. No, that was Pontius. Pontius Pilate.
Okay. Then who was Caesar?
No clue.
Do you mean Caesar?
Caesar, yeah. That's him.
Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
But Julius Caesar didn't even exist back then. If I'm not.
Wait, guys,
down.
search because I can't search up because it's gonna kick me out. Search up who was who was that man? Caesar in the Bible.
Julius Caesar.
You mean Tiberius Caesar, perhaps?
Look, man, the man that had a conversation with Jesus and was saying, "Look at everybody. They're saying to sacrifice you."
That's Pontius Pilate.
Yeah, but that's
Caesar
not a name.
Augustus?
Pontius Pilate isn't a name. Search up Pontius Pilate's name.
That was his
Caesar
name.
Augustus. But is that the one you're talking about? The first Roman emperor?
Man, hold on.
Pilate was literally his name, though.
We'll wrap up after
Whose
this
name is
point
that,
because my
man?
phone's about to die and I want to upload this.
Yeah,
Okay.
give me a minute. Let me go. Let me search this up.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave. It was a good debate, guys. See you.
Yeah,
Catch
cheers.
you later, dude.
Shalom,
See ya.
shalom. Okay, guys, hold on. I'll bring
But
up my
Sinji, you
laptop.
realize I had to speak louder in order to be heard during that time when
Yeah,
everyone
but
was
it
cutting
was
each other
funny.
off. I don't even see how it was funny though. I wasn't even speaking loudly, honestly. I'm gonna play that back. I'll clip that bit. I got proof. So, Ron, you're not going to make a normal server?
Nope.
Not right
It's gonna
now.
say Christian.
I might make another server. Because there are a lot of people that followed the last server that aren't really interested in the Christian server. You're going to have to be quick, Ron. I have to end this in like a minute.
Yeah, I know. My bad. Yeah, the first Roman emperor, right? Caesar Augustus. He was
August.
ruling at the time of Jesus Christ's birth, and he's in Luke 2:1. All right. Tiberius Caesar Augustus. Yeah. Okay.
So what's your point?
Jesus was sacrificed. So he's real. He's like, there's literally records of him being real.
Who?
Oh my god. I just said it, man.
We have to wrap this up.
Okay,
We can
okay,
continue
fine.
this in your server. Peace out, everyone. Bye.
Peace
Shalom.
out.